Good evening, dear viewers. My name is Jeb Ampilik, and after the long summer break, I welcome you to the next Goldvorsorge webinar titled The Power of Gold. Yes, the world is shifting. The Eastern powers are moving to the center, while behind the scenes, secret forces are pulling the strings. Gold and silver have reached record prices during the summer break, and yet the market still appears undervalued. This is a situation that creates excitement and opportunities that should not be overlooked. Today, we will also take a closer look at the special funds in politics. Find out what's really behind them in just a moment. And to wrap up, we'll address your most intriguing questions directly with detailed answers from our experts. And it is precisely these experts that I would like to introduce to you now. We begin with the chief economist of Goldvorsorge and president of the Gold Standard Institute, Thomas Bachheimer. Today, once again joining us live from Dubai. I read today that it's almost 40 degrees where you are. How did you manage to cope with that?
Well, it's manageable now. It's definitely a relief. The summer was quite tough. The older you get, the harder it is. Let me give you a quick example. You switch about 20 times a day from 48 degrees to 23 degrees. That adds up to 500 degrees of temperature difference in a day. That really takes its toll. I hope today it won't affect my speaking ability.
I'm convinced of that. Next, we welcome Christian Trinker, an expert in secure asset management who supports our clients every day with tailored solutions and really shines a light on the financial system. A warm welcome.
Thank you. A wonderful good evening. Thank you for the invitation. And dear Thomas, can't you send us a bit of nice weather? It's already starting to feel like autumn here. And the grass is always greener. On the other side, as they say in English. But we're going to have a great evening one way or another.
Thank you, Mr. Trinker. We'll see you again a bit later. And finally, Nikola Draguljevic, expert in market analysis, price developments, and precious metal trends, as well as head of wholesale at Goldvorsorge. Good evening.
Yes, good evening to everyone out there. Not only is the weather in Dubai so hot, but the prices are going crazy too. And that's why I'm even more excited about today's webinar.
Yes, dear viewers, before we get started, I would like to explain the features of the webinar to our many new viewers who may be joining us for the first time today. Throughout the entire webinar, you can send your questions directly to us using the private chat function. You can find this at the top right of your screen. At the end of the event, our experts will take dedicated time to address your questions. And if you would like to place an order this evening or need assistance setting up your high security storage, or perhaps you would prefer a personal consultation, feel free to give us a call. Our hotline will be staffed for you throughout the entire webinar. The number will be displayed for you several times during the webinar. On the screen. Yes, I would say let's get started right away with our first expert. Thomas Bachheimer will now present the current situation in the East, how the powers there are increasingly coming into focus, what tensions are emerging with the West, and why. Right now, the silver market is more interesting than ever. Please go ahead, Mr. Bachheimer.
Yes, thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope we had a peaceful summer. For those who were away for a while and are now coming back asking, did I miss anything? Well, you could say, yes, you did miss something. This summer was very eventful. From Donald Trump and tariffs to various meetings in the global South and East, all the way to the dismissal of an executive director of the Federal Reserve. Everything was on offer. And you can see the temperature is heating up. I don't even want to start talking about what's happening in Poland, Russia, and Ukraine. The global temperature is rising a bit now as we head into the Northern Hemisphere's autumn. And that's why I hope you had a relaxing summer, because autumn is going to be quite exciting. And for me, although today I'm talking about the global South, I want to take a brief detour first. It's very important. I call this detour the end of Western dominance and the dominance within the West, because both seem to be coming to an end. But let me briefly explain why. Because just recently, 10 days ago, we had a major anniversary. If we could please switch to the next slide for a moment. Yes, the 31st, August. in the afternoon of 2015, that's when Mrs. Merkel, during the summer press conference at the Chancellery, said for the first time the phrase, "We can do this." And we all knew then that was the phrase that would define a decade. But of course, this phrase that carries a lot within it. Some of you who have heard my lectures already know that this keeps coming up with me. For me, there are several major events in life. The first, of course, was the bank bailout during the financial crisis. The second event was, in fact, that 31st August 2015. And the third shock event was then COVID with the government measures. So these are the three most unpleasant events in my life. But back then, of course, with no idea about COVID yet, people already thought this is now the peak of things, what Merkel said at the time, because we all know we can do it. That is, a few Germanists among you will shout it out, a so-called imperative. It's a command form, and commands in a democracy, it can't be said often enough. They always go from the bottom up. Never, or at least never for an extended period, from the top down. In emergencies, that's allowed, but only in absolute emergencies. But that was a long-term plan with this, "we can do it," which she repeated several times. And when it came up, I happened to be talking that week with people smarter than myself. They really are smarter, and they said, yes, the Feuilleton in Germany, they're going to tear this apart, because this kind of tone, the Süddeutsche and the Frankfurter Allgemeine in their weekend supplements definitely won't let that slide. And what happened? There was complete silence. And so somehow this absolutist tone was able to go through. I'd like to remind you of something here, of an American saying that goes, "It takes two to tango, so it takes two for the dance to work." And with the absolutist master or the dictatorial master, you also need two. One who wants to be the dictator and tries to be, and the second who puts up with it, and maybe the dance looks bad. The third, those are the ones, my people, who should have stepped in. But seeing the people and my own as one dance partner, they did not intervene. And the catastrophe took its course. If we could please move on to the next slide. I just want to briefly say a little about the chain of command in a democracy. The people are sovereign and no one else. And in a democracy, political authority fundamentally comes from the people. And the people legitimize the government. And politicians can only issue orders and laws within the scope of the mandate granted by the people, but never beyond that. And if orders are continuously given from the top down, then democracy gradually transforms into an authoritarian regime. And for me, that was somehow the humus or the foundation for what was able to happen later during the COVID times. That was the first preparation. People still put up with it, and then things progressed from there. If I could please have the next slide. This is the next one. There is also someone who is a feudal lord, and that is Donald Trump, who governs in a similar manner, ladies and gentlemen. But Bachheimer readers and Goldvorsorge customers and the West, they knew this because I had already predicted in January what would happen, namely that Trump would govern according to the unitary executive theory. And that's exactly what he did. We noticed it on the very first day as we went along with Trump's executive orders, or rather had to experience firsthand. And it was quite exciting to see all the orders he issued, which actually should have required legislation. That always depends on the interpretation of the President of America. The president can, in fact, govern according to several theories. And Donald Trump, he is a power-hungry president, centralist, authoritarian, and immune to criticism. But this unitary executive theory, which we have never seen in such a strong form under any president, at least not in my lifetime, of course, also has opposing theories. For example, there is the checks and balances theory. According to this, the executive, legislative, and judiciary are equal and they monitor each other. Then there is also the congressional supremacy theory, where Congress is the most powerful institution because it is directly accountable to the people. This brings us back full circle to Merkel, and the president only has executive, that is, derived functions. A proponent of such an interpretation of the presidency would be the Jefferson Democrats, named after Jefferson. And then there is the emergency power theory, a strong executive authority. And this legitimizes the president exclusively in emergencies such as war, economic crises, or uprisings. The most famous president associated with this theory was Roosevelt. In the 1930s, he governed with emergency powers, but he never used any strawman tactics or monetary policy measures under an executive theory. He simply had them carried out. And then there is the pragmatic president. The president does have leadership responsibility, but is not a superior authority. His power depends on the context of congressional approval, and of course, ultimately on the will of the people as described in the literature. And I find that somehow quite charming. That's why I included this theory as well, since Barack Obama is often cited as the most prominent president to have governed according to this theory. And we know that Barack Obama single-handedly dropped quite a few bombs without asking anyone. Yes, let's please move on to the next slide. This is just the proof, ladies and gentlemen. This is an original slide that we presented in January at several lectures, but also here at the Goldvorsorge webinar. We knew this, we were also afraid. And the funny thing is, usually when you think a lot, you sometimes end up being too afraid, or at times having too much respect for things that could happen. That happens to me quite often as well, that you say, well, what could come of this? But in this case, I was right. By the way, I was also right about COVID, though I have been wrong about other things before. But in this case, ladies and gentlemen, I was right. Because what happened in the height of summer, if we move to the next slide? Yes, Trump actually dismissed Lisa Cook, one of the subordinate presidents, and he did it single-handedly. And so the concern that was raised here in the Goldvorsorge webinar earlier, Trump's takeover of the White House already, as was announced, has come to pass completely here. But good old Trump didn't count on the host, because just yesterday the Supreme Court, maybe they knew that Goldvorsorge would be holding a webinar today. Yesterday, the Supreme Court essentially overturned this decision. And in my opinion, this woman is now likely to remain in office. And so the absolutist rulers in the United States have been stopped by the rule of law. I still have my issues here in Europe, because for us, there is no one, neither, as I said, the people, nor the media, nor the judiciary, especially not the administrative and constitutional courts, who would intervene. And that's why we are now facing these problems. And as a result, we are falling far behind in the world rankings for economic growth and other important living standard statistics. Next slide, please. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, at the very end of June, we officially said a fond goodbye for the much anticipated summer break. And then in the subsequent months, a follow-up conference call. We had already determined the topics for the fall, for the first webinar in September. And we had already planned for that because we had a quiet regulation in place that we would focus heavily on the meetings and gatherings of the Global South and the Global East, and that this would be one of the main topics of the first webinar. And I have to say, honestly, we were right about that. We had several meetings, and I would like to address that in this series of slides. If we could please move on one slide. So it goes from Rio to Tianjin, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, to Beijing, and then to Vladivostok. All of these meetings, Rio was already in the first week of July, but everything else took place in September, some even in August, but mainly in September. And it truly was a geopolitical stage, ladies and gentlemen. First, there was BRICS in Rio. Then came the Shanghai Cooperation Summit in Tianjin, or Tianjin. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. And afterwards, there was the 80th anniversary parade marking the end of the war in Beijing. And at the same time, some heads of state also met there. The economic fair in the far east of Russia was taking place as well. That was the Eastern Economic Forum in Vladivostok. And it was a relay race. The relay baton, if we keep switching, is multipolarity, and it no longer falls. If it were to fall, onto the data carpet of the West, but rather onto the map of Eurasia. But we need to define what BRICS is and what, well, the Shanghai Cooperation is. Allow me to briefly distinguish between the two. BRICS is more of an economic, it's more of a loose association. And the Shanghai Cooperation, it's almost not comparable to the EU, but more similar to it than to BRICS. The EU states they also have their headquarters in Beijing. It's much more stable in its operations. The Shanghai Cooperation focuses more on security policy components, on counterterrorism. It's not a military alliance like the Warsaw Pact or NATO, but weapons do play a certain role there somewhere, while BRICS, as we all know, is more about economics and is more about finding a way to move away from the dollar. The geographic focus for BRICS is the Global South, and for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, it is primarily focused on the vast and significant region of Eurasia. And the primary agenda is precisely that: economy, trade, finance. And for Shanghai, it's security, anti-terrorism, border protection, and, I've just forgotten, military exercises. The parallels between both organizations, which, and I say this fully aware, will make life very, very difficult for the West. In the coming months and years, China and Russia are the driving forces. This is an anti-Washington alliance, that's clear. An anti-Washington, London, Brussels alliance, and the two are the main driving forces behind it. The goal of both organizations is a multipolar world order. You know this from my BRICS lectures, so I don't need to explain it in detail. Both have a certain expansion dynamic. They are steadily growing and are now institutionally interconnected. They are working together increasingly in a complementary way, with each having its own areas of expertise, but also its own specific organizations. And at various important international summits, the two major heads of state often refer to the mutual support and significant cooperation of these formats and their respective nations. And what else they have in common? And that is precisely what is actually rather concerning. They are building a bridge between the Global South and Eurasia, and that really makes their cooperation appear extremely powerful. And they want to create a counterweight to Western alliances such as NATO, the EU, or the G7 format. Let's move on to BRICS in Rio, where I had the honor, thanks to the foresight of Goldvorsorge, I am sent to the BRICS conferences because it must be said, the management of Goldvorsorge wants to know what is going on, especially in the currency sector. I'm also fortunate that by now I get invited without any problems. They definitely keep a close eye on what I report because, as I said, in Kazan, I was the only one. In Johannesburg, I was the only one. In Kazan, there were 4 of us Westerners, and in Rio de Janeiro, if you don't count the Brazilians, the Brazilian journalists, I was once again the only one from the West. At BRICS, you could say, compared to previous sessions, it came in a bit more subdued. There's a Rio declaration with a lot of cooperative rhetoric about AI governance. This governance is led by the UN, and it will be very inclusive and people-centered. Those are actually almost Western goals. Financial targets were deliberately handled in a moderate way. The process of de-dollarization was not invoked, but it was mentioned as a relief. But local currencies, infrastructure, and trade cooperation were also agreed upon. It's a diplomatic step. You can't call it a coup. Indonesia has now officially joined. Xi stayed away. Putin was only present virtually. Visually, of course, that dampened things. Had an effect. Content-wise, however, it was still solid because multipolarity always requires a bit of headwind. And in terms of substance, without making a big show of it, they actually made significant progress. And then in Tianjin on the 1st and 2nd of September, there was what was called an administrative revolution. Unfortunately, I can't remember who wrote it, but it was some British outlet. At this summit, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO, adopted a total of 24 official documents, including the important Tianjin Declaration. This declaration outlines a development strategy that extends through the year 2035. The signal here is that the Shanghai cooperation is no longer just about security, with all this paperwork it has just produced, it is becoming a platform for setting standards in technology, trade, and infrastructure. There is much less pathos here than at the big BRICS meetings, but more management of multipolarity has been established. It was really a bureaucratic meeting, but of course with great significance for the future. While the West is busy debating values, the Shanghai Cooperation has produced documents of value. And we all know in the geopolitical kitchen, it's naturally the one who is the best cook, the one who writes the shopping list, and not the one who just argues with the market. But already the very next day, on the 3rd of September, the Grand Parade took place in Beijing. That was a nighttime projection, and that was once again an event for the photographers, which, as we know, was not the case in Jiangxing. And this was for the 80th anniversary of the end of the war against Japan. She was seated on the stage, and once again, these were signals. Beforehand, there had been a bit of bureaucratic maneuvering, but here, clear signals were sent. He was flanked by Putin and Kim Jong-un, and that was a trio on the grandstand, just as we remember from the Soviet era, and this was the main stage in Beijing. And the West was not present on this stage, and the West was absent anyway, because they were not invited. The message, of course, ranged from hypersonic weapons to drones. The images they showed us signaled we can if we want to. And there was also a very prominent speech where it was literally stated, the world stands at a crossroads. You don't need to know Chinese to understand that, nor Latin. All you need is airtime for it, but the West simply doesn't have time for things like that. That was rather rarely observed and described except by Betcherno.com, I have to say. The West prefers to focus on gender-neutral toilets and downplaying crimes committed by immigrants. That, of course, takes much more time. But overall, it was certainly less of a feel-good fireworks display. There was nothing likable about it. It was basically the announcement of a list of duties, as they like to call it, and all of this set to the backdrop of marching music and perfectly synchronized soldiers. And the message was clear. Please sign here to acknowledge that history will no longer be written in Washington alone, but also in other cities. That means they don't want to take away all of the historical narrative or the Western Bloc, but they do want to have a hand in writing the book as well. And through bureaucracy and a show of power in Beijing, they have made it clear that they now claim the right to help write future history. If such a thing even exists, future history that is. And then immediately overlapping, but again, 2 days later, that was just over. That was the Vladivostok Eastern Economic Forum, which took place from the 3rd to the 6th of September. And that was the so-called, someone wrote, the workshop wing of geopolitics. This year, it is the Asia-Pacific showcase for Russia with very large, built with Eastern self-confidence and pragmatic delivery lists. Namely, they said, we need ports, railways, energy, logistics. I'm summarizing roughly, of course, but plans were announced there regarding which infrastructures will be built. And what's interesting about this is that in principle, we shouldn't really care what kind of infrastructure they build in Russia. But these were all cross-border, mega-continental, transnational infrastructure projects that were described, planned, and even approved in Vladivostok. For example, Putin is ordering a program for rare earths to be implemented by November. So they're working as well, quickly under time pressure. That's not something you're usually used to with these kinds of formats that I would say in September. By November, this international program for rare earths has to be completed. He wants to expand the supply chains to strengthen Russia's independence, even though he was speaking within this conglomerate. Those are all interesting nuances that could be heard there. And the supply chains to China and the trade routes between China and Russia are supposed to be less one-sided. So good old Putin really took a moment for himself there. And even despite this alliance where several countries were involved, he really meant Russia first. In fact, he's almost echoing Donald Trump a little there. And we know that, of course, whoever has the raw materials needs less moralizing and less preaching, but they write the price tags. And Putin has really signaled that to us. Where are the labels for the raw materials of the future hanging? They are obviously hanging. Vladivostok. But what connects these four acts? there are three structuring threads. These threads, the first is institution rather than intuition. The BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation are coming together, but not in the form of a love marriage, rather in the form of a marriage of convenience. The Shanghai Cooperation provides security, governance, and structures, while the BRICS add the economic backdrop, and together they are creating a regulatory alternative to the G7 cosmos, slowly but steadily. The second point is in show and substance. So the parade was probably the symbol of these September days, while the EF, that is the Economic Forum in Vladivostok, provided the substance. First, you state your capabilities, what we can do and how we can defend ourselves. And then you lay the tracks, the cables, and sign supply contracts. That is practical geopolitics. From the textbook, without geopolitics, with a raised finger pointing at other cultures, countries, and continents, as our politicians so often like to do. Yes, and Rio was measured. The anti-dollar rhetoric was restrained, previously rather calm, subdued, and local currencies were the focus. In Görniken, that was more the case. Methodically, a path until 2035 with many papers and resolutions and a lot of bureaucracy, as already mentioned. And the music is playing for the long term. And over there, they don't look at the daily chart, as the saying goes. So the West gives speeches about a rules-based order and all the theories, but hardly decides anything, while elsewhere the rules are currently being written, and in detail with footnotes. Now I need to quickly look at the screen. We're already on the slide. Can we go back once more, please, to the eagle? This slide, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Julian. I actually sent him my prompt for the image creation, and you've already been able to see them yourself. He makes very beautiful images that are impressive and make it clear what it's about. And especially with this image, that was particularly important to me. Here we have the spider web of multipolarity with, for example, Shanghai, with BRICS, with Beijing, with Vladivostok, and the West, represented by the bald eagle, the emblem of the West, or at least of the Americans, which is now getting caught in this spider web. Yes, now the next slide, please. Yes, the conclusions. We have developed 8 theses here. BRICS has become more professionalized, but it is not as revolutionary as it once was. Fewer slogans, more process. And AI governance, one must not forget, I forgot to mention this earlier, is actually the vehicle for setting future norms. This was also mentioned several times in Brazil. Indonesia has been positioned and elevated as the anchor of Southeast Asia because Indonesia joined BRICS, which increases its reach, maritime supply chains, critical raw materials. And of course, it has an enormous demographic with over 200 million people. In my opinion, even the largest Islamic state in the world. The absence of Xi and Putin in Rio may affect the optics, but not the trend. The scene was deliberately shifted from the BRICS meeting to Tianjin and then to Beijing and Vladivostok because they wanted to show that there are several formats. The BRICS hall is not necessary, just look at everything, and the combination of these formats will then become equal to the West or perhaps even surpass it. So the Shanghai Cooperation is institutionalizing the Eurasian routine. With these strategies up to 2035 and in the Tianjin Declaration, and the whole thing already had a certain flavor to it, of world conquest, but in a very bureaucratic way. And I was there myself in South Africa, and I can tell you it was completely different there. It was really baroque, wild, and revolutionary. And the parade signaled deterrence and a politics of history. And Weladi stands for raw materials, realpolitik, and the West, which just watches and sleeps. We even painted this picture to illustrate it. The West remains reactive with moral rhetoric, tactical tariffs, strategic underinvestment in supply chains, and also punitive sanctions. And I want to mention one of these things, which is also what the West is still doing. In terms of economic policy, the woman, Callas, one of these EU commissioners, suggested that a sanction should be imposed on Russia because Russia does not respect the sanctions. You have to come up with that first. And there you can see who the East is dealing with while they are strategically planning. It's an easy game. Yes, and multipolarity is not a spectacle as you have shown this year with all these formats. In reality, it is pure administration and a bit of deterrence with the military parade. And whoever builds process competence and establishes a state, payment systems, and logistics in the long run will gain all the economic power. And the old order is not, as we move to the next slide, a house of cards that suddenly collapses. It is a blueprint that is being revised by others. In Rio, they are writing the prologue. Can we go to the next slide, please, so that it makes sense? Yes, this is the blueprint that is being revised by others. So you can also see the different colored hands that we have included there. This is meant to show this global force. These are multiple cultures, religions, traditions, and economic systems that are working on this blueprint. Brahe has just written the prologue. This past summer, Jansin meticulously attached all the necessary specifications while Beijing diligently wrote the compelling blurb, and Vladivostok has already proactively ordered the essential materials so that this important book can actually be successfully written and published. That's all from me for now regarding the Eastern Offensive that we had, but now I would like to say a few words about what consequences this has for all of us. And if we could move on to the next slide, please. Yes, land law versus maritime law, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully you know what I mean by that. In land law, the state is a commonwealth founded on popular sovereignty, a constitution, and the inalienable rights of human beings. In maritime law, on the other hand, the state appears as a corporation or company in which the citizen becomes a contracting party, and rights are considered irrevocable privileges. Sorry, revocable privileges apply. That's the crux of the matter. My apologies. In short, land law is based on natural law and democracy, while maritime law is based on commerce, contracts, and legal fictions. And I believe if you have listened to me closely, you know what I mean, especially as Austrians and German citizens. Austria is, I'm not entirely sure about Germany, especially northern Germany, but Austria is traditionally a state organized under land law. We don't make these hasty decisions. Or historically, at least not since joining the EU is clearly organized under maritime law, and so we are torn in our souls because we no longer even know what it's all about. We have this land law within us, and now maritime law has been imposed on us by the EU. That may have worked for the Belgians and to some extent for the British, maybe not in terms of their legal system, but it fit for them. Or for the French and the Spaniards, that may very well be the case, but for the large Germany. And as for Austria, I can say with absolute certainty, maritime law does not suit us. And it is precisely China, Russia, and most of the countries involved in the SCO that are organized according to land law, historically. Now, that doesn't mean that's the only reason someone might want to live in China. No, to be honest, I prefer living in Austria or in Dubai. But these traditions that are practiced under land law, they are more stable and citizens can orient themselves better. And if we move on to the next slide, we can sum this up even better in 2 or 3 sentences. Citizens are contracting parties under maritime law, and rights are granted as privileges within a commercial system. Laws are based on commercial and contract law. The government acts as a trustee of a corporation, and under land law, the state is a commonwealth in which the people are sovereign. That brings us full circle. Ms. Merkel essentially relinquished the sovereignty of the people and left Germany to maritime law, so to speak, and rights are considered inalienable. The separation of powers ensures legitimacy, and the government is subordinate to the will of the citizens. Let's move on, please. Maritime law is more like a polite conversation between ships. You wave at each other, you ignore each other, or you ram each other, depending on the weather. Rules, yes, but only until a bigger cannon comes into view. Anyone who internalizes this sentence inevitably thinks of America, or at least the British. In land law, the one who holds the wall wins. In maritime law, the one with the gunboats and who appoints the referee wins. These are quotes that I found on the subject. And you know, all of this points to a certain kind of politics that we've had to endure here, or rather worldwide, since the Second World War. and which has increasingly interfered here. In Europe, in nations traditionally organized by land law, if we could please move on. Yes, here we have another overview. Read through it. I can't read everything out to you. There are major differences in the legal basis, especially regarding the subject. The person that is a legal entity in maritime law. The name is written in capital letters. Check my passport, please. And under land law, a human is still a human and a natural person. The state as a corporate construct, the people as sovereign under land law, the state as a commonwealth. The laws are commercially codified, whereas under land law, they are legitimized through the separation of powers and the legislature. I just want to say now, if you continue on to the next episode, there is a lot more to discuss about this. I can see that my time is slipping away from me. Please read through this to understand what the differences are. And personally, I really have the impression that after attending these conferences and talking to many people there, I found that they are more organized according to land law, even the Brazilians who really have a proper coastline, just like the Chinese. But again, I don't want to live in the States, but I do want to be organized according to land law. That's what I want to say with this. And I believe that with this retreat of the West, as we have experienced it up to now, over the past 2 decades, and with the significant rise of the global South and East, there is now a noticeable shift back to land law-based structures. I just want to give a small example of what stability means. You can criticize Putin's stability, that he has been in office for so long, but these frequent changes of chancellors that we have, well, that's not exactly a guarantee of stability either. And especially in the foreign ministry, ladies and gentlemen, Austria has had 10 foreign ministers since 1990. Russia has had 3. And that's where you see a major difference. When I'm on a diplomatic mission now and we travel to Russia, I don't know who I'm dealing with. No matter whether it's good or bad, with us, it changes more often than a toothbrush. And that this is actually possible. I also see this in the organization of maritime law. If we could please move on. Yes, let's get to the pleasant part, ladies and gentlemen. The first week of September, a bit of precious metal still needs to be dealt with, of course. The first week of September, we'll hear plenty about it from Mr. Dragiliewicz later, but the gold medals immediately came to my mind, especially yesterday and the day before. We all know my name is Bachheimer. Johannes Sebastian Bachheimer wrote the Goldberg variations, namely for a harpsichordist named Gold, because they were so difficult to compose. And for me, it fits this way, these variations, because in the past few days, we have reached the Golden Mountain Peak in various variations. I'll start with the simplest, or rather the smallest one. It's funny, while we're at 80% of the all-time high. In America, in the silver price, the day before yesterday, we reached an all-time high of 35.50 in euros. That shows the loss of purchasing power of the euro because silver, like all other commodities, is still mainly quoted in US dollars. And people in Europe even tend to quote the dollar prices rather than the others. But it's quite interesting that in Europe, the new all-time high was actually reached while the others are lagging behind at 80%. The second thing that's really important in Europe when it comes to the Goldberg variations, you know this from me. I mention this almost every time I give a talk. The euro was introduced and the first price quotation for the euro was at 3.10 US dollars. That was on January 2nd, 2002. And yesterday, for the first time, we reached 3,100. The day before yesterday, we reached 3,100. That means in euros, the gold price has increased tenfold. And those are, of course, my Goldberg variations. That's really fantastic. At the same time, yesterday, for the first time, a kilo of gold was over 100,000 euros. So I don't know how many peaks this gold will reach, but it's definitely a fireworks display if it weren't so sad. Because one thing must also be said, the higher the gold prices are, the worse everything else is. Even if you've secured your wealth, if things get really wild and you're the only one who has secured their wealth, that's not exactly fun either. But unlike silver, with gold, we have other developments as well. In the past few days, we've had all-time highs in at least 15 currencies, including the US dollar at 3,674. 3,127 was the euro. A record high that we've set 10 times the original purchase price, 2,917. Also a new high for the solid Swiss franc and in the Japanese yen as well, but that's obvious. 540,000, just under 539,000 and something. Ladies and gentlemen, even Arab states have reached historic highs. The gold price has hit historic record levels. And all of this, of course, this also gives us a signal, if the euro is the weakest, that the fiat world is now on the verge of collapse. Or you could also say, on the brink of serious grave problems that are hardly solvable. I just want to briefly add, if France wants to go to the IMF and beg to be rescued like Greece or Argentina, first of all, France is not a small country like Greece. Secondly, Argentina is not in the EU, but France is one of the flagships of the EU. And that's where we have the problem. If you go to the IMF, you absolutely have to avoid that, dear French people. Yes, I've heard others say it, but don't go to the IMF for one reason. If you go there, every euro investor in the world who doesn't live on the euro periphery will immediately dump and sell all their euro holdings because they'll say, the ECB were not even capable of saving France. Now it's over. And that's why I don't understand all the media discussions of the past few days where people say, yes, we absolutely have to go to the IMF now, and that this is just spread around without any comment. This is one of the most dangerous steps there is for the euro, because any Japanese investor, for whatever misguided reason, or any South American who has invested in the euro will immediately sell it, which is completely understandable. It's understandable. If we could please move on. Then there's also a rather interesting story about silver. Saudi Arabia has followed Russia. You know it, webinar participants, we've talked about it. The Russians announced last year that they would expand the list of strategic metals to include platinum, palladium, and silver. And now Saudi Arabia is doing the same. It has now become a strategic metal, and this is where things get dangerous for the bullion banks, ladies and gentlemen, because now they have to, or are now betting against a sovereign. Saudi Arabia has invested $30 million or $300 million, a few minutes worth of oil revenue into silver. But as in philosophy or the digital world, it's 0 or 1. That means this is the first step in making a decision, and they could tomorrow, at any time, they could ramp it up. If we move on to the next slide. Yes, you know this from before as well. The Chinese are opening up. They have unbelievably low official reserves, but they smile about it and know very well that these reserves are different. They also admit that these are distributed across various state agencies. The import and export statistics from Switzerland, for example, speak for themselves. It's obvious, even without counting on your fingers, that the Chinese have significantly more gold at home. And right here at a gold yuan, they could probably work on that. What we also know is that everything that goes into the Shanghai Gold Exchange, this is also so-called LBMA gold, normally doesn't make its way back to the West, except perhaps in a very interesting form, because the Chinese now also want to build storage facilities. And the first storage facility was built in Hong Kong. And I think I've covered that enough. I've already explained that. I was also in Hong Kong and listened to what was behind it. And obviously preparations are being made for a bigger gold story. And for that, you also need a certain amount of gold in the West, even if it's owned by the Chinese. Please continue. Yes, those are the offshore storage facilities, which I've already discussed. And there are rumors, though I really have no proof. Let's continue. That the Chinese are also building gold storage facilities in Riyadh and Nigeria. And as I mentioned earlier, normally gold does not leave China. That has never happened before, but now it might. And then, of course, it becomes dangerous. And why in Riyadh? Well, Riyadh is the #1 oil producer, and Nigeria isn't weak in that regard either. And the Chinese have traditionally been very well connected in Africa. And one could possibly already consider that these might be preparatory steps, indicating that in the future, we will probably have to pay for energy resources with precious metals. That would, of course, be quite a bombshell, and the West would naturally be unprepared for it. and it would have no chance to catch up because the West simply has far too little of the precious metal, and much less than the global South and the East, because once again, we've slept through a lot. If we could please move on. We come to the LBMA. That will be the next topic. The next dominant stronghold of the West. Just like with the dollar, gold has always belonged to the West, of course, controlled for the most part. It was legalized, you could say, by the West, and you weren't allowed to buy anything else if it wasn't LBMA. And I believe the LBMA is once again coming under significant external pressure. And once again, this is due to the global South and the East. They are exerting a lot of pressure here. One must not forget, everything that goes to China also went to the LBMA, was remelted there, and then is no longer considered LBMA. At the gold exchange, not even 2% of all products are traded as LBMA. But up until now, price formation has taken place in the LBMA environment, especially in connection with the COMEX. Not based on real physical gold, but dominated by derivatives, swaps, short selling, and so on. And that is what defines the LBMA for me. The ratio between traded gold and actual physically existing material is 1 to 100 or even higher. The price could be artificially suppressed, and that was simply financial manipulation. An oligopoly has developed. The market makers of the LBMA consist almost exclusively of Anglo-American banks. HSBC, JP, Morgan, UBS, not American, of course, but also from the West. Standard Chartered, and so on. And this is exactly what the global East and South now want to counteract massively by making non-LBMA gold socially acceptable. And these previously mentioned banks often trade both on behalf of clients and for their own accounts at the same time, which of course leads to conflicts of interest. Such a conflict of interest will never be decided against the bank. The LBMA story is somewhat intransparent. A power center with price discovery by insiders. I found a quote about this. Yes, and the LBMA system lacks democratic oversight, and it somehow has a kind of black box character. There are neither parliaments that oversee it, nor do international organizations control it. There is no public audit process for the gold and the so-called good delivery. That is certified. No one knows how it works or why it works. No one knows. Well, that's an exaggeration. Of course, they know, and they make a big deal out of it. But for all the other players, if you want to get something certified by the LBMA, it's not that easy. The LBMA is a self-regulating private institution that determines the global gold standard and trading standard without democratic or independent oversight. That needs to be said, and it should be allowed to be said. Of course, it's a secure form of gold. I personally also own LBMA gold. I have nothing against it. Those who do have a problem with it are in the global South. And that's the line of argument I've just presented to you. What also happens with the LBMA, just like with the US dollar, is a certain kind of sanctioning. And in 2022, Russian refineries lost their good delivery status with a single stroke of the pen. It wasn't due to a lack of quality, but because of geopolitical sanctions. So the LBMA is by no means a neutral entity, but rather a politicized tool used to isolate countries. Naturally, this leads to suspicions of price manipulation, and there are various lawsuits. Fines against JP Morgan and Deutsche Bank for manipulating gold and silver prices, whistleblower reports about spoofing, that is, placing artificial orders from top to bottom to push the price down, and when people start selling, removing the top orders, having already bought at the bottom and possibly making profits yourself. So all of these things naturally happened more easily here because in a non-physical market, I can influence the physical market. This is because the official price often does not reflect supply and demand, but rather the positions of the major players. And the whole thing still has a colonial aftertaste, which is why the global East and South are taking action. Almost all gold mining countries in Africa, Latin America, and Asia have to obtain LBMA certificates in order to be able to sell their goods worldwide. These certificates are very expensive and complicated to obtain, and they make many local refineries dependent on the West. Yes, the LBMA functions more as an economic control and sanctioning instrument than as an actual commodity trader. That's not my opinion. That's what I hear at BRICS and other conferences, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, it's good money, but if you're a producer on the other side who isn't allowed to participate, then you want to challenge the whole system. Of course, you want to attack it somehow. I didn't want to leave you without that information. I know this is a sensitive topic, ladies and gentlemen. Keep buying LBMA. It's a good thing. It's a safe thing, no doubt about it. But as a producer, you do end up looking through your fingers a bit, just like I'm looking at the clock now and realizing I've already gone 5 minutes over, so I'll leave it at that for now. And if we have time later, I'll come back to my other topics. And I apologize to the control room for Bachheimer talking too much again. Yes, thank you anyway. Mr. Bachheimer was as thorough as always, and I think people know a lot more now. Hopefully, later we'll have the Q&A session where you'll be able to see him again and he can add his own comments.
I've heard that now is a good time to get into silver, just as Mr. Bach has always said. And we'll continue right away with the next expert, Mr. Trinker. But before that, let's take a break together and have a look at a new product from our range.
Heimerli and Müller Collection Box. The smart way to build up your gold piece by piece. Whether for 10, 25, or 50 individual 1G Unity bars, each new bar is a visible step forward. The high-quality plastic case protects your fine gold bars, keeps them securely in place, and makes your progress visible. Ideal for investors, collectors, or as a special gift. With the collection box, saving gold becomes plannable, secure, and measurable.
Yes, thank you to the government for the video. One of our many gold products that we offer on our website, goldvorsorge.com. Orders can be placed at any time, even right now. Of course, the online shop is open 24 hours a day. Don't hesitate, you are also welcome to call us via the Gold Hotline. We won't waste any time and will continue right away with our next expert. The expert who perhaps knows everything about the financial system is dealing today with a word that often appears in the media. But in reality, no one really knows what is actually behind the nicely phrased term special assets. Mr. Trinker will soon show us what is truly behind it. In addition, as in the previous webinars, he will continue with the topic of Bitcoin and explains to us what cunning plan lies behind this financial instrument. The stage is yours, Mr. Trinker.
Yes, once again, a very good evening to everyone. And thank you for the kind introduction. Of course, I don't know everything. No one knows everything. Maybe Thomas does, because he really is a whirlwind of fresh, great ideas. Information that just amazes me. So much has happened in the past few months while you might have been relaxing somewhere on the beach. But I hope you had a good rest and welcome back. Whether it will be a hot autumn, we will see. But it will definitely be an exciting autumn. Looking back once more at the last webinar, I tried to explain the financial system to you to bring it closer to you with all its many components, of which there truly are many. I told you that politics always survives everything. As we can see on the slide, after everything else has been squeezed dry, politics is still left, and that's how it has to be. Because of course, is it adaptable? I mean that in the best sense of the word. I don't mean that in a derogatory way at all. And politics will ensure that if the current system ceases to exist, there will be a new system. There always has to be a system. And that's the part I'm going to talk a bit more about now. Why does politics survive? You could say, in Viennese style, because everything can be twisted in such a way that it fits. For example, current topics like Russia, Putin, trade wars, taking on debt, conscription, and much more. All of these topics. But in reality, everything is much more complex than it appears at first glance. And of course, the media are part of this as well. If a politician speaks and no one listens, then it has no value. Scandal. That's why politics is so closely intertwined with the media. That's a fundamental rule of politics. Sometimes things just go less noticed. But now, in times like these, this absurdity has become the norm. Because we are living in times of monetary abundance. We've already discussed this in detail in the last webinars. We are in the era of unlimited money. And with that, you can manipulate the system to an unlimited extent. But don't get upset when you hear in the news about the enormous sums of money being made available for all sorts of things again. That's just how it is. Whether you choose to emigrate as a solution and wait for the system to normalize again, or whether you wait here, I can assure you things will eventually straighten out again, because the more extreme it gets, the better it will be afterwards. Again, my goal is to create an overall understanding and to talk a bit about the topic. And please don't fall into the panic that's being spread everywhere, because that is a very, very clever tactic in politics. The tactic of putting people into a state of panic every day. In a way, reality is being staged. Then there are so many topics and things to get upset about, and you don't even know what to focus on anymore. That's the case right now, for example, in America. If you've looked into the topic a bit more closely, there are so many issues that upset people. In one way or another, there's no real focus anymore. And that's an important tool in politics. I put them in a state of panic every day, and they won't notice anything anymore. That's a clever tactic, and it works very well. I'll give you a few more examples from politics in a moment. For example, you can divide and polarize the population. You deliberately make a minority the scapegoat. That's happened in the past as well. Then you stir up sentiment with it to rally against the enemy and get back at America. At the moment, there's a brutal hunt for Latinos in the USA in order to exploit the issue of illegal immigration for political gain as much as possible. Or you simply spread falsehoods until you yourself gain control over the narrative. With the so-called fake news, which everyone already knows, at least the term. Another example was the exaggeration of health risks and drastic warnings in pandemic policy. There too, we were divided. The population was split and incited against each other. Some with masks, others without, instead of having objective debates. Why? Because people are simply easier to influence that way, and politics can implement its various agendas more easily. These are exactly the strategies where reality is staged. It wasn't that long ago that you were only allowed to walk around wearing masks. Do you remember? We tend to forget far too quickly. But that's how well the propaganda worked back then. People would get into arguments on the street if someone wasn't wearing their mask. And to be honest, at some point we kind of lost touch with normality. These are all political strategies, and they're used by all sides. I'm not trying to point fingers at any one side here, whether east or west. These are global strategies. On the one hand, there's a brutal war of aggression, but it's just called something else. Another time, international military forces are announced, but they're disguised as peacekeepers, like Europe just recently announced for Ukraine. A president bombs another country and wants the Nobel Peace Prize for it. Have we heard that before? It's not the first time that's happened. Just think of Obama. But compared to that, it's almost harmless when you just casually rename a few debts as special funds just to get back to the topic. And that's what I'd like to elaborate on a bit more here. Those were a few examples, and in all of these strategies, politics is always behind it. But if you take a closer look, what's really behind politics? Behind it all is money. In reality, it's always about money. And if you take an even closer look, like with those Russian nesting dolls that you open up, and then there's a babushka, and inside there's another one and another one. If you open it up and you open up the money, you'll understand what's really behind it. It's the raw materials. And that's why here at Goldvorsorge, we always keep coming back to the topic of raw materials. Just like right now, if you listen to the news, America has already announced that they want to normalize relations with Russia. It's all about raw materials, oil, gas, rare earths. And the BRICS countries, as Thomas has already reported a lot about, for example, now India and China, they also do a lot of business with Russia. In reality, it's always about raw materials because we are living in the age of raw materials. Back to the financial system. Now we're jumping back from real physical assets to the paper system. And as we know, the financial system is currently in a phase of exponential unlimited money creation, as we've already heard. And that, of course, involves taking on massive amounts of debt. To implement this properly, the government gives citizens a program to follow. And we've already heard about the various strategies in politics. Of course, above all, this includes the power of words. Here's a little footnote for everyone who enjoys reading. A small book recommendation. Edward Bernays' Propaganda. Yes, Bernays. He was born in Vienna in 1891 and died almost 100 years later in the USA. And he showed politicians how to manipulate the masses. In other words, he essentially made propaganda a science. It's a highly recommended work. If you read it, you'll understand a lot of things that at first glance might make you wonder, why is it like that? But now back to the topic. That's why, of course, people use the word special fund when new debt needs to be justified. Because that sounds much more positive, much more pleasant. It has a certain something. It's much better than saying we have to take on new debt. And now let's take a look at a little numbers game. For example, as Austrians, we always like to look to Germany, since we're a small country. That's our big neighbor. And what happens there also happens here, just on a smaller scale. Let's take a look at the defense budget. And then you read in the newspaper, the government is increasing the defense budget from just 2 to 5% of GDP. That actually doesn't sound so bad. Like a small step from 2 to 5. Not so bad. A little increase here and there. But the problem is, a percent of Germany's gross domestic product isn't just a little bit more. If you do the math, Germany's GDP in 2024 was about 4,290 billion euros. 2% of that is 86 billion euros. 5% is 215 billion euros. So that's not just a little more, that's almost tripled. And after all, and you really have to think about this, dear citizens who are all listening now, that's half of Germany's entire federal budget. The German federal budget in 2024 was about 427 billion euros. And now half of that is supposed to be spent on defense. That was just done on the side. Politics sold that to us quite nicely. As a small adjustment, from 2 to 5% is nothing. That's the power of words. They don't call it debt. Instead, the term they use is special fund. That sounds very positive. It's like a treasure. Actually, it's even better than a reserve. It's as if you already have it somehow. It's already there. And now it's being used. But the reality is these are simply new debts that have been prettily wrapped up with a bow. Let's do a little numbers game. Something to think about later when you go home or if you're already at home and can't fall asleep. Because the numbers are running through your head, just imagine. It's the same for many of us. Yes, you earn reasonably well in Europe. You pay 50% in taxes to the tax office, and that's not all. It goes on, then you go shopping and you pay another 19 or 20% value-added tax at the supermarket. And really in all the stores. And now you even hear talk again about the wealth tax in Germany, which was never actually abolished, just suspended since '97. So in the end, there's not much left of your hard-earned money. And if you invest the rest of your money somewhere and earn returns, you have to pay taxes on that again. So just do the math and see how much you actually have left. It's all very clever. Planned and executed. And the media play a big role in this. Because if the media say it's okay, then the citizens also say it's okay. Of course, the media report very little about countries where things are done differently. So I'm sure our dear Thomas can confirm for us, there are countries where you only pay 5% income tax. So you get to keep the rest. 50%. 50%. In that case, I'd almost rather be in Dubai with 5%. Who knows what Thomas is thinking about that? But seriously, where would anyone want to live in the long run? Of course, where business is done, where taxes are low, and where you can be successful. But let's take another look at the whole picture. This isn't something that just suddenly happens. This is simply the entire system. And it doesn't depend on this government, everything that's happening right now. They've only just recently taken office. And just because you, dear viewers, have stocked up on raw materials, you're smart, you've already secured yourselves, so to speak. That's what the big companies are doing as well. And now there are also many countries where taxes are very low. Of course, there's not much reporting about that. Those countries are more likely to be put on a blacklist because otherwise it would become too popular to move there and prefer to live there and get by with just 5% taxes. But let's come back to Europe, back to the high tax countries where the money printing machines run day and night. Dear listeners, we have simply arrived in extreme times. Racking up debt until it's no longer possible. Now you might say, well, whatever, it doesn't matter. That's just how it is. So we'll just have a mountain of debt. But that brings us to the next topic. With all this debt, there's massive inflation. And if you give me another second, it's already on the slide, there will always be more and more money in circulation. Productivity isn't increasing. This leads to a loss of purchasing power to inflation. And this is where you lose out because it's a gradual expropriation. The media always presents it nicely, but the real inflation rate is certainly much higher than what we hear in the evening news. Because if you go shopping, your gut feeling will confirm it. How can it be that one product after another becomes twice or three times as expensive? And then they talk about 2 or 3% inflation. Of course, the real inflation rate is already much higher. But for politicians, it's great because inflation naturally makes the debt seem smaller again when money is devalued. Here you can see on the chart that supposedly the inflation rate has already dropped back down to 2.2%. 2025? I strongly doubt that. So that's definitely propaganda, probably straight out of Bernays' book originally about how to influence people. And even if everyone believes it, it's still not the truth. And everyone is getting poorer, except for those who, as they've already done, have secured themselves with raw materials. And believe me, not that many people have actually realized what's really going on behind the scenes. You can tell because there's still enough gold available for everyone here. So you can gauge from this how much or how little citizens care about raw materials, or how much or how little. It's a topic that's on people's minds. That's why my recommendation is not to fall for the politician's strategy. Don't go into panic mode, but don't stress yourself out either. Just make sure to plan all of this in good time. And you don't have to do it today or tomorrow, but really take a calm look at it. Get the experts on the topic. Feel free to send me an email as well. But make sure to include it in your plans. Make sure you factor in raw materials. For investors, gold comes first, of course. Plan ahead, step by step. With the right experts, it all goes quickly anyway. And it's really not that hard. Then you'll be on safe ground and have solid structures. And then you can escape all the drama and everything that's still to come, because this is by no means the end. On the contrary, what's coming now is the peak phase of the exponential monetary system. So there's still a lot ahead of us. And of course, that's why my clients always ask me why the big crash hasn't happened yet. You could also ask Thomas about that later during the Q&A session. But I do see it this way. The main reason is that the system, the financial system, is still alive. It continues to live because it is constantly being fed with new money. It's like a gigantic creature. It has to be kept alive. And we have a very dynamic debt system, one that is constantly improving itself. It also keeps escaping the next crisis time and again with a new trick. I'll get to the trick I'm referring to in a moment. But that's exactly this exponential component of the monetary system. Now, of course, one might ask the question, who benefits from all of this? There will also be some interesting information from my colleagues on this later. But who is really behind the politics? That might sound conspiratorial now, but it's actually not that complicated because in reality, it's always the big organizations and corporations. They profit from the new debt because the money has to be spent somewhere, because the new debt brings in fresh money. And these are the names, whether it's BlackRock, Vanguard, JP Morgan, all the American tech giants, Alphabet, Microsoft, and many more. And some of the people who represent them publicly are also well known because they have a lot to do with politics. That's how the cycle closes. And as I mentioned earlier, what is behind the money? That's right, you surely remember it's raw materials because money is just paper, fiat. And there have to be real values behind it, otherwise the whole thing makes no sense at all. And if you want to understand how this whole power structure works, there's that old proven saying, follow the money. It's always been that way. Behind the money, of course, as I said, are the raw materials. Here is politics, behind it is the money, and politics always needs money. But that's no secret, and it's not something evil either. On the contrary, politics has to be implemented. It's not as if this is just some kind of evil conspiracy. There is also good politics, especially, I would say, at a more municipal, local level. That's still where the best politics is done. But that's just how systems are. Money and politics go together, but behind the money is the raw material, to repeat myself. But you'll probably remember it even better that way. And of course, the most important raw material for us is gold, because it has simply proven itself for thousands of years. That's just the way it is. The thing is, gold is very, very dangerous for the system itself. Because if everyone buys gold, the whole thing doesn't work anymore. Then gold will soon be sold out. We've already experienced that during the pandemic. And even now, gold prices are rising rapidly. Nicola, I don't know, maybe he'll say a few words about the gold price, or maybe he already did in the last webinar. There are always large gold purchases happening in the background. But mind you, this is a danger to the system. And that's why gold is often portrayed negatively. At the same time, debt is packaged in a positive way. For example, as special assets. The term special assets is the classic example of this. Politics now has a lot of money again thanks to these huge debt packages. And with that, the media can be wonderfully controlled again. And of course, twist everything. Instead of waging war, they want the Nobel Peace Prize. At the same time, war is precisely the best business for everyone. And so the public is systematically deceived. Keyword, propaganda. But again, we have a complex, clever financial system. Currently, the BRICS countries in particular are very successful economically. The Americans are also still booming somewhat. That also has a bit to do with these trade barriers. Whether that's really sustainable is a big question, because they have huge problems with inflation. But of course, things can't go so well everywhere. You already know what I'm getting at. And that's why here, racking up debt is the order of the day. But at some point, things will turn around for us as well, and then we'll see a big upswing here too. Until then, it's good if you can find some way to keep yourself safe. We're happy to help you ensure the safety of your gold and silver. And because of these global changes, we were the first to set up a high security vault in a BRICS country. And back when the major financial crisis hit in 2008 and 2009, when all the big Swiss clients moved to Singapore, we also set up a high security vault in Singapore. And if at some point in the future a promising new world emerges somewhere else, we'll open a vault there as well. Because the safest vault is the one that can adapt. We've proven that with Singapore, with BRICS. By BRICS, of course, I mean Dubai, and we're open to new locations. So the security of your precious metals is taken care of. Please get in touch with us. We'll be happy to take care of it for you. Of course, for your own safety and the safety of your family, I urge you to plan ahead yourself so that you can watch things unfold comfortably if the situation continues to develop. But the system as it currently stands, will probably continue to function for quite a bit longer, despite all the doomsayers and all the companies, because there's a magic trick, there's a super invention. Everyone who already knows me knows what I'm about to hint at. And of course, by doing so, I'm once again creating a small group of enemies who don't want to hear this, but I am convinced that this is the case. So this super invention, that is Bitcoin. I'll talk more about that in a moment, because the financial system, of course, wants everything to keep running as it is and for gold to look bad, because otherwise money would flow out of the financial system. And there's something ideal for that. A gold that isn't outside the financial system, but is actually inside it. And how do I do that? Well, this is a bit of an exaggeration on my part, but I take something out of nothing, paint it gold, and say, this is the new gold, so that everyone rushes into it. That's a very good plan. I've already described it to you once before, the way I believe it happened. And here, it also fits very well into the overall concept. That's why I included it here as well. And because, of course, it's absolutely brilliant. Why Bitcoin remains, this is now the second part about special assets and Bitcoin, about propaganda and misinforming people about something important. This action is directly leading towards the rescue system of the entire financial system, which is a significant and complex undertaking. That's the transition. No matter what you choose to do in your life, no matter where you currently are situated in your life, I can personally guarantee you that this particular idea is indeed a very good one. And we at Goldvorsorge, in general, we recommend that you always take care of a so-called plan B in good time. To think through what your possible plan B could be. I repeat this over and over. I recommend it to everyone, because if A no longer works, there's always plan B. That way you're not left exposed or lost. And by plan B, I don't just mean having an alternative to do something else in life, but rather being prepared, planning ahead. And not just following along like sheep, because we all say, so to speak, that we are the good sheep, the little sheep, as they say in Germany. And for the most part, we just do everything we're told anyway. And somewhere out there are the elites who are pulling the strings. This isn't a conspiracy theory, that's just how it is. And so we wander around in this little sheep system. The wolves keep a close watch on us so that we don't escape. And it's really not that easy to get out of stay within the system, otherwise you might end up being punished. And it's the same with the financial system, right? The financial system hasn't been asleep either. And in fact, it came up with a plan B a long time ago. Not yesterday or 2 years ago, but decades ago. And funnily enough, this plan B also starts with a B. It's Bitcoin. I've talked about this many times before. With Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, we've beautifully prepared the whole world digitally over the past few years for a wonderful new digital future. I'm not being sarcastic, I mean that quite seriously. It's really, really important to understand this and to try to see things from this perspective. Because the classic narrative about Bitcoin, and there are the hardcore Bitcoin fans, and there are good reasons for that, yes. The classic idea is the typical romantic stories, right? It's the people's free money, yes. It's decentralized, it's uncontrollable, it's a revolution against the system, the new digital gold. Many have speculated with it and in some cases made a lot of money. There's some truth to that as well. And in the short term, that's certainly still possible, yes. Some people have really made a fortune with it. But now, if you associate Bitcoin with freedom, you have to say, be careful, because in reality, Bitcoin is fully integrated into our digital system and the digital world, yes. So freedom isn't really all it's cracked up to be anymore. Bitcoin is actually the perfect capital trap so that money stays within the system, so that this entity I mentioned earlier is fed with money so that the financial system continues to survive. Let me briefly summarize what I mean by that. Yes. Bitcoin was invented because the system had a problem. or rather because many wise people had already sensed or foreseen that these problems would arise. Because of these systemic problems, many parts of the financial system are falling away one after another. Last time, we talked a lot about the consequences of the zero interest rate policy, for example, what that means for bonds, just as an example. But what I want to say is, in the financial system, many parts are disappearing more and more, yes. And that's why the system needs alternative methods, alternative investments, and that's where Bitcoin fits in perfectly, yes. And that's why it was also patented and implemented by the NSA. As banal as it sounds, that's how brutal it is. And if I integrate it into the system, then I also have to make sure it runs successfully. And all of that was done really well, yes. That's why now a lot of people always ask me, when is the digital euro coming and so on. I would say, well, maybe next month, maybe in half a year. But soon, yes, the next stage of the digitalization of money will be launched. Believe me, you will all experience it, and not just in Europe. It will happen worldwide. But please also keep in mind, for us little sheep, it all looks like this is a new development, but it isn't. Everything that's happening has been planned decades in advance. At the beginning of the 2000s, there was already a patent for Bitcoin. I've already shown you that before. In 2009, Bitcoin was officially introduced, but even in the late 1990s, there were already discussions, and the concept was being discussed in great detail back then. There are also many documents you can read about it, but in 2009, Bitcoin was released, and that's when the necessary parameters for all the related systems were set, yes. What else will develop from this? Well, we'll see. But the most important info, no matter what happens with Bitcoin, no currency has survived in the long run so far, except for gold, yes. And even the digital euro, or whatever it will be called, whatever comes and on whatever system it runs, will also not survive in the long run. But of course, with these digital systems, everything will also be much easier to control, yes. Debts can also be created even more easily, and inflation will be much easier to manipulate as well. So the politicians are doing their job very well with the further development of the financial system. Therefore, I recommend to you, dear listeners, that you also do your job well and take care of proper financial planning. Overall, one has to say that Bitcoin is, of course, extremely important for the financial system, as we've heard, because many components are eliminated and existing components are already risky. But above all, it's an important development because Bitcoin, so to speak, is paving the way for the CBDC, the digital money, yes. You always hear that the digital euro is coming, right? But that's actually just a tiny part of the truth. One has to be aware that this is an international trend, yes? There are currently over 120 different CBDCs being developed worldwide. 120. Of these, about half are already in the testing phase. And if Bitcoin didn't exist, everyone would immediately say, what nonsense, what rubbish, why do we need this? But in hindsight, it was clever that Bitcoin established itself over the years, right? In a way, the ground was really prepared for this, on which the CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, that's always a bit of a tongue twister, but keyword, digital euro. So there will be a digital counterpart for every currency, right? They can grow on this ground because we're already, so to speak, pre-programmed for it. We know this, right? And for that, cryptocurrencies were established all over the world, right? It's no longer a foreign word. Every child knows about it, right? An ideal environment has been created for this so that now, so once again, it doesn't have to be today, it could be in a year, but it will come as surely as the sun rises in the morning and so on. You understand me? So that you can switch over to CBDCs, whether that's triggered by some event or done gradually with pensioners first or whoever else. The market was prepared, and all of us, all the little sheep, yes, were preconditioned. Just think about what all this means and how it all fits together. Because if you were to switch directly from money, from fiat money to CBDCs, that would have been very difficult, right? But now everyone knows about crypto. Everyone has traded at least once. Bitcoin has conquered the world and is a global system. And now you can carry out the transition to 120 CBDCs when everyone is ready, right? That's important to know. It will happen soon. It's just a matter of everyone getting started in a coordinated way, probably yes. But my recommendation for you, get prepared, okay? You can still get involved with Bitcoin in the short term. You can also profit from it, right? You can gamble, but in the end, the system is always the winner, right? It's a product that is more or less a trap. At the very least, it's something that will keep the financial system alive for a longer time. But in the financial system itself, everything is always changing. As you know, I mentioned bonds earlier. Everyone who has bonds now is losing, yes, because inflation is eating everything up. A few years ago, people used to say that was the safest thing there is. But that's not the case anymore, right? Even the 100-year bond in Austria, which I won't go into detail about now, is actually a joke, right? And part of your pension is in there too, whether you know it or not. The severance payments that are automatically deducted there, but that's another story. The good thing perhaps about the 100-year bonds is rather morbidly that in 100 years we'll all be somewhere else anyway. So maybe you have to look at it from that perspective as well. But of course, the state is happy because it received a lot of money to spend, right? But since I'm already talking about pensions, take your pension into your own hands as well. Don't rely on the state because in the end, the system always wins. And once again, I'm not against Bitcoin. If you want to gamble, go to the casino or gamble with Bitcoin, buy Bitcoins, sell them again. There are many people who have made a lot of money with it, but just like in a casino, there have to be losers too. But in the end, it's guaranteed the bank always wins. And that's why I just want to point out, look out for yourselves, because when all parts of the financial system eventually collapse, the new systems like CBDCs will come, right? And you will be forced into them. Unless you've already made provisions with enough gold and silver, right? With gold and silver, of course. But one thing is also true here. In the end, the digital will remain because there's really nothing behind it anymore. It's a handful of nothing. You really have to think about that, right? Because the area of life insurance, now I've talked about bonds, the area of life insurance is also already very much at risk. It's actually a disaster. We also offer to dissolve them in the short term. That's another topic altogether. Contact us about that. Stocks are still doing quite well at the moment, but that can also change quickly. It's all built on paper, and real estate, that's another story. If you own your own property, that's always the most important thing. But investing in real estate, the so-called concrete gold days are actually over. A lot is still going to crash there, and you shouldn't wait too long. But Bitcoin will remain because there's nothing inside Bitcoin. It's a great buffer, right? When everything that has something behind it has been squeezed dry, then it's smart that there's an invention like Bitcoin where there's actually nothing behind it except a power connection, right? A lot of people will hate me for saying this, but that's just how I see it, right? And there's unlimited buffering going on there. Everything that crashes in the other areas gets put here into Bitcoin, into cryptos and CBDCs. Just imagine if people were to buy gold now. No, that's exactly the goal, that they don't do that, but instead everyone buffers into cryptos and Bitcoins, and that way the financial system will keep running for quite a bit longer. Politics will be able to rack up exponentially more debt for quite a while longer. There will probably be several more special funds to come. They'll be called something else again with catchy names. But the main support to make this possible will be Bitcoin, yes. So that's also why the title, why will Bitcoin be the one left standing, right? And what's also interesting in this context is that if you take a look at the current numbers, it's actually pretty similar to all other systems, yeah. Because just like with the monetary system, it's also the case here that about half of the entire global Bitcoin supply, just think about that for a moment, please keep that in mind. Half of all Bitcoin is held by just 1% of all addresses, yeah. That's also not, that really makes you think. With Bitcoin, people were even smarter, yeah. They basically just copied gold completely, yeah. Not only did they make it gold colored because Bitcoin doesn't actually exist, There's nothing physical about it. You have to represent it with an image. Of course, it's gold colored and it doesn't stop there. No, they even say it's being mined. Mining, yeah. It's being mined, yeah. Even the production, the so-called production of Bitcoin is copied from gold, yeah. There are terms like mining, prospecting, just like you imagine a classic mine, because in a mine, gold is extracted, and Bitcoins are supposed to be thought of as being created in the same way. But in reality, it's completely different. You need electricity, energy, so that the computer runs, of course, a lot of energy, and then it's generated out of nothing. Yeah, an algorithm. I get it. There's computing power behind it. But when you explain it to someone like that, it's really not that sexy. Yeah. So it's actually not that exciting. And many would say, that's just nonsense. Yeah. But when it's being mined, there's something to it. So they're clever. They mine Bitcoin, and then something gold-like is created. It's the perfect advertising campaign, so to speak, to keep the financial system alive. So take a look at it from this perspective as well. It's really been set up very professionally. And where does it come from? Only intelligence agencies can pull that off. And now here comes another interesting aspect, something you also often hear about in the news. Thomas could also say a lot about this. These are the derivatives. Yes, that's also a part of the financial system. I've already mentioned the usual parts of the financial system. They're already very thinned out, but on top of that, there's a huge derivatives market built on top. And if these basic things are no longer stable, you absolutely need something new to build new derivatives on. Yes. And there, today, people build, at least in the past, derivatives were built on real assets like real estate, for example. Yes. But today, they're really built on nothing. Yes. A Bitcoin is nothing. It's not a commodity in that sense. Yes. It's just presented that way. Derivatives are then built on top of nothing. Yes. So a derived function of nothing. Yes. Namely of Bitcoin. Yes. And that is just absolutely insane. It's really damn clever, actually. Bitcoin is sold to us as if it's limited in supply. They say that mining is limited. As I mentioned earlier, this nice term mining, and soon it will be over, namely at 21 million Bitcoins, but then it can still be used exponentially with the huge derivatives market. And this Bitcoin invention can certainly be increased infinitely. So you'll have those 21 million and then again and so on. So there are still going to be a lot of imaginative things happening, and the financial system won't be reformed as long as this continues. And with the past derivatives, if we talk about that briefly again, we have to say it actually worked really well and kept the system alive. But you see, at some point, this system also comes to an end, right? And now you know why. In the end, only gold and silver are left for you. And every second or third customer asks me what the deal is with cryptocurrencies. I try not to speak badly about something, but I've now summarized it. And if you've taken this as too negative a criticism of cryptos and Bitcoins, then please just take it as my personal opinion. But I did this so that you could hear it all together once and know what's really behind it. Because this is what people keep asking me about. And my recommendation is, if you're really planning your life savings, your future, your plan B, and you want it to be long-term, then you should, because you also have people you're responsible for, like your family and so on, then you should draw the right conclusions from this, yes. And drawing the right conclusions, that is real security. And real security is gold and silver for your future. That is my recommendation. And now I'm done with the topic of Bitcoin. We can certainly discuss any Bitcoin-related topics again during the Q&A session. And dear Bitcoin fans, please don't be upset with me, but that's just how I see it, and I don't think I'm alone in this. And I believe this theory is actually the real Bitcoin truth. Thank you for your attention, and we'll see each other again in the Q&A session.
All right, Mr. Trinker, thank you very much for the presentation. As already announced, we'll see each other again in the second part of the live broadcast in just a moment. We still have one more expert for tonight. But before we get started with that, let's not just talk about gold. It's so beautiful. Let's take a closer look at it again with another product, a new addition to our range.
Maximum flexibility for your gold reserves. The sealed Unity boxes from Heimerle and Moyle. Available with either 50 or 100 individual 1-gram gold bars made of 999.9 fine gold. Each sturdy box features a viewing window and a serial number for optimal protection against external influences. If needed, you can remove individual bars, ideal for partial sales, exchanges, or as a gift. Unity Box, your gold investment, secure, flexible, and value-retaining.
All right, thanks to the production team for the great video. Let's move on and not waste any time. Even though time is flying by today, we're now going to bring our last expert onto the stage, Mr. Nikola Draguljevich. He told me before the show that he actually had enough material for 4 to 5 hours of conversation today, since we didn't do anything over the summer. But so much has happened. He'll try to summarize the essentials for us. Both gold and silver have broken all kinds of records over the summer. How long do you think this upward trend will last?
First of all, thank you very much, dear Stepan, for the introduction. And of course, thanks to my colleagues for the great content. You've already heard the interesting insights from Thomas and Christian. Two perspectives that show just how profound the changes we are currently experiencing really are. And this is exactly where I want to pick up, because Stepan already mentioned it. What's happening right now in the gold and silver markets is nothing short of incredible, I would say, because we are once again witnessing historic developments. But let me say right away, today is not just about bare numbers and charts. I want you to also understand what is really happening behind the scenes. While the media wants to make you believe that everything is under control, we see the exact opposite every day, right? And the question is not whether the current financial system is shaky. The only question is how much longer it can even hold out. And even more importantly, are you prepared if the house of cards starts to crumble or even collapses? So I think after today's webinar, you will be sure. Let's start with the invisible and secret players. Christian already mentioned this earlier. Before I talk about gold and silver in detail, let's take a look at the forces that are actually pulling the strings in the background. Forces that you hardly ever see on the evening news, but which decide where capital flows, which corporations become big, and which disappear from the stage. Christian already mentioned it. One name keeps coming up, BlackRock. This asset manager controls over $9 trillion. And this is what $9 trillion, or rather $1 trillion, looks like visually and written out, ladies and gentlemen. If you look at the graphic on the left and stack $1 bills on top of each other, the length of $1 trillion would be 110 kilometers. That would already put us in outer space, and BlackRock manages 9 times that amount, right? And together with Vanguard and State Street, the other asset managers, it's actually more than $22 trillion, almost a quarter of the entire world economy. 88% of all major US companies have these three as their main owners, as you can also see on the right side. BlackRock alone is the largest shareholder, especially in Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Tesla, in banks, oil companies, and even in the media. And do you really believe that such a player is only managing other people's assets? Unfortunately, many people believe that, but BlackRock doesn't just limit itself to investments and asset management. They also have a seat at the table where the big, important decisions are made, at the meetings of the American Federal Reserve or even the European Central Bank. So you really have to understand what that actually means. Those who move billions on the markets are at the same time advising institutions that decide on interest rates, the money supply, and bailout packages. So here you really have to ask yourself whether this is still a free market or if it has long since become a cartel where a small circle writes the rules. If you look at BlackRock's annual return tables, to put this in context with the precious metals market, it shows that gold is ranked second, even above the S&P 500. That means the returns on gold, or rather gold investments, are extremely high at BlackRock. And now just imagine what that means for gold and silver. These players hold gigantic paper contracts that act like an invisible lid weighing down on prices. But paper is not metal, dear viewers. If these contracts are ever unwound one day, or if they all sell off, there simply won't be enough physical delivery possible, given the ratio we currently have. Thomas has already mentioned it, 1 to about 130, yes. And that's exactly when what many are still ignoring will happen. The price will shoot up because real metal is limited, but paper is not. And for everyone who invests in physical gold and silver in time, it's actually a double win. Why? Because not only will they be holding the only real thing in their hands, they'll also benefit from the price explosion, which in turn marks the end of the paper illusion. This is the moment, I would say, for those who have prepared. Most people have already heard of BlackRock, and it's mentioned very often, but have you also heard of the IMF? Probably little to nothing. So let me talk a bit about this organization. The International Monetary Fund plays a central role in the precious metals market. Founded as a safety net for countries in crisis, today it holds more than 90 million ounces of gold. That's around 2,800 tons. This makes the IMF the third largest holder of physical gold reserves. You can also see this on the right in the list. That's actually more than Russia, China, and Italy. Officially, however, the gold reserve belongs to all 191 member states. But the ones who really make the decisions are those with the greatest voting power. And those are once again the United States. So without Washington, nothing happens here. So the IMF is not a loyal, neutral helper. It is a tool of power in one way or another. And if one day a new monetary system comes, which it will, because everyone has been preparing for it for years and everything is already pre-programmed, then this gold will be played like a joker. And do you really believe that the USA won't claim it for itself? I suspect they will, because in times of crisis, no one gives up their gold. That's exactly why it's so crucial that you hold your own physical metal, because only those who have secured it physically will be winners in this game. That's why I recommend, or as Christian has already mentioned, only the physical matters. So in the IMF, everything is based on votes by the members. That means if a country wants to sell its IMF gold, there has to be a vote. And the greatest voting power lies with the United States. Or to go a bit further, maybe even with BlackRock. I would call that democracy at its finest. At the same time, central banks around the world are working on digital central bank currencies. Officially, this is being sold as progress. In reality, it means, unfortunately, control. Every payment, every purchase, every transfer would be centrally recorded. Taxes could be set individually, penalties automatically deducted, and access to one's own account could be blocked if someone behaves incorrectly according to the government. And here again, the secret players, BlackRock advises the decision makers on how this system needs to be set up. That means since the financial crisis of 2008, their influence behind the scenes has steadily grown. You see them everywhere. All of this paints a clear picture. States are over-indebted, corporations like BlackRock move trillions back and forth, and the International Monetary Fund holds a gold reserve that, like a joker, waits in the background. And the wealthy of this world, what are they doing? Of course, they're thinking about all of this. They've already started taking action. Studies on global millionaire migration show that capital is flowing out of countries like Great Britain, China, or India. And where is it going? To Dubai, Singapore, or even Switzerland. What's being taken along above all is capital and physical gold. And always with the same goal, to bring wealth to safety. And that's exactly what the three of us, Thomas, Christian, and I, are noticing, especially since we are currently receiving a particularly high number of inquiries about high security storage facilities in these countries. Here, it's especially Thomas in Dubai, because we see that Dubai, or rather the UAE, is right at the top of the list with a net increase of 9,800 millionaires who have come to the country. And exactly that, dear viewers, are all important signals, because when the powerful have long since secured themselves with physical gold and silver and are emigrating to safe havens, you shouldn't let yourself be convinced that everything is under control. The reality looks completely different. Christian has already summarized it very well. I too use inflation as an example. Even though it is rolling over everyone like a monster, citizens are supposed to ignore it. You can also see this clearly here on the left side. However, if you continue to ignore it, the monster will eventually devour you. The solution is the gold on the right side. It is important that you make provisions in time and build up your own physical precious metals, because that is the secret weapon against the monster. That's a secret tip from me as well. Yes, there is also a lot of talk about price setting, price formation, price manipulation, and so on. Secret price setting is also discussed. Here too, I would like to elaborate a bit so that everything is clear and explained. The central banks themselves are also involved in the precious metals market. They have their fingers in the pie. In addition to the massive physical gold purchases we are seeing, or rather, which we are still seeing now or have seen strongly in the past, like China, etc., the BRICS countries, which have significantly increased their holdings. Physically, they are especially important players in price setting by holding artificial paper contracts. For a long time, they held huge bets against gold, so-called short positions, and thus they pushed the prices down, artificially downward. This naturally created the impression that gold was weak and uninteresting. But since around 2024, this picture has changed dramatically due to gold's strong performance. According to the official bank participation report, the banks have now suddenly unwound a significant portion of their bets. Out of around 30,000 contracts, 13,000 contracts have been closed. And that's nothing less than a clear signal because the banks themselves no longer believe in it, falling prices. And these are all official figures that anyone can look up. And what are they doing now, the central banks? Exactly the opposite of what they've been telling you for decades. They are buying physical metal themselves and storing it in their vaults. Why? Because they've realized that the age of paper is coming to an end. The situation is even more extreme in the silver market because there are open short positions of over 500 million ounces. That's nothing less than a ticking time bomb. That's how I would put it, because more and more investors are demanding physical delivery. That's exactly when a so-called short squeeze threatens to happen. A short squeeze, as you can see on the right side, occurs when large market participants bet that a price will fall. In other words, go short. But what if the price rises? Instead, you have to limit your losses and frantically buy back, which in turn drives the price up even faster. And this is not just a theoretical scenario. We already saw this in 2021 when the Wall Street bets community started the silver squeeze experiment. Millions of small investors bought silver coins and bars at the same time to put pressure on the bank's short positions. The price jumped noticeably in a very short time. And that was even though it was just a brief attempt back then. You can clearly see this price increase here on the right side, which is thanks to the whole experiment. Today, the situation is even more dangerous. That's how I would assess it, because the short positions are enormous. The demand for physical silver is growing and the stockpiles are shrinking. And when this bomb goes off, it's not a fantasy, but a logical consequence. And then silver will no longer just be the poor man's gold, as it's so often called. At that point, the metal will completely change the rules of the game as well. In the market, the logical consequence for the banks is, of course, to quietly unwind their bets and to hedge themselves on a large scale with real physical gold and silver. But private investors are completely unaware of this. And this is exactly the crucial point for you. Don't wait until it's splashed all over the headlines. When the banks themselves are already hoarding gold and silver, that's the clearest signal you could possibly get for all of us. Anyone who hesitates now risks facing empty shelves later or having to pay prices that seem unimaginable today. And that's why I keep saying it. Secure your physical metal now. Not on paper and not within the financial system, but tangibly secure and stored in high security vaults that you can access at any time. Whether in Zurich, Singapore, or Dubai, Christian can also help you with that. Because in the end, it doesn't matter what's written on paper, but who actually owns real metal. And that's exactly why it's worth taking an even closer look at the current movements in the precious metals market right now. That's why gold activity. So, what does the current situation look like? Since the spring of 2025, we've been witnessing a spectacle the likes of which hasn't been seen for generations, because gold is reaching one all-time high after another. And here, I want to congratulate everyone who has already built up their own gold reserves or has continued to expand them. And I just realized that somehow in every webinar, I always end up congratulating the viewers since we keep reaching new all-time highs. But rest assured, this is only the tip of the iceberg. Let's take a look at the chart. Since the beginning of 2025, gold in US dollars has gained over 37%. The breakout above the key resistance zone here at $3,500 marked a new all-time high, and this confirms the strength of the ongoing bull market. The now established zone at $3,500 serves as a solid support base for further upward trends. The price will now correct a bit and fluctuate between the $3,500 and $3,600 levels before making a move toward the $3,650 mark. It has already started moving in that direction. Particularly important is the connection between the upward trend line and the 200-day moving average. That's the blue line below the candlesticks. This indicates a clear upward trend for the past 200 days. This is an additional confirmation of a steady and ongoing bull market. The reasons for this rise are quite obvious. We already mentioned it in the webinar, or rather, I have already mentioned some points. But a policy of cheap money and the devaluation of paper currency are among the main reasons. There continues to be strong interest in the physical market from investors and central banks. And I experience this firsthand every single day. What's interesting is that sales figures continue to rise steadily despite price increases. That means by now even private investors are also in the game, and it's important to note that private investors are no longer as price sensitive. Instead, they are pursuing just one goal: to protect their wealth. Gold is and remains one of the few assets that has preserved its purchasing power for over 6,000 years. Remember that. And this behavior is also reflected in the following chart. Despite all-time highs, people are consciously looking for options to buy gold, not to sell it. You can see it here. The blue line represents the search queries for buying gold. The orange line below is the search bar for selling gold. This means that the search queries for buying gold are 3.5 times higher than for selling gold. I can only confirm this in trading because sales figures continue to rise despite the ongoing upward trend. This means that even private investors are no longer price sensitive or at the reserve bank, but are also in the game because they want to secure their wealth. Further evidence as to why gold keeps breaking new records lies behind closed doors. Somewhere it was hinted to me from the sidelines by people no one talks about. At the meeting in Jackson Hole, the head of the American Central Bank, Mr. Powell, said that the risk balance needed to be reassessed. A nice way of saying that the situation is serious, I would say, because the US economy grew by only 1.2% in the first half of 2025. Germany has been in a prolonged crisis for a long time, but I won't go into that now. Let's stick with the USA. In 7 of the last 12 quarters, the US economy has contracted sharply. At the same time, there's a very interesting chart on the left side. At the same time, the reverse repo program of the American Central Bank is running dry. You could describe this program as a kind of reserve account for emergencies. In 2022, there were still $2.5 trillion parked there. Today, it's not even $50 billion anymore. Here you can see the curve going downward. That means the money was used for special projects that nobody knows about. And if this reserve falls to zero, there's a risk of liquidity drying up. And we know from the past that this very situation regularly leads to severe tensions in the markets, because then there is no money left available for emergencies. And yet stock prices continue to rise just because Jerome Powell used the word interest rate cut. This shows how addicted the markets have become to cheap money. They cling to every hope, but the dollar continues to weaken and weaker. Silver, then we come to the silver market. Yes, if you look at the chart, just fantastic, I would say. With silver, we've even seen an annual performance of 42% in US dollars. Again, congratulations to everyone who has already prepared and stored silver. The decisive impulse came with the breakout above the $40 mark, which had previously acted as a stubborn resistance, and has now become new support for further highs and records. The price will also consolidate here in the range between $39 and $40 before breaking through to the next price target of $45. That means we still have an optimal price for buying more. Many people call silver, as I mentioned earlier, the poor man's gold. But if you look at the fundamentals, you immediately see that silver is extremely scarce. Around 800 million ounces are mined annually, but only a quarter of that comes from pure silver mines. The rest is produced incidentally as a byproduct in copper, zinc, or gold mines. This means that even if demand increases, production can hardly be ramped up. Nature itself sets the limits here, just as it does with gold. Silver is at the very top right in the matrix of the most needed industrial metals. You can see it here in the matrix on the right, with silver all the way at the top right corner. This means that industry needs silver the most, as it is crucial for future technologies. However, it also carries the greatest supply risks. In other words, demand is high, but supply is low. I would call that an incompatible combination. At some point, silver will no longer even appear in the matrix because industry will have consumed all available stocks. That's why it's important that you too buy physical silver privately now and store it with us duty-free in a high-security vault. Then, in the future, you could even become the suppliers for the industry because demand will continue to rise for silver. But what will happen to the price? This is exactly where the absurdity lies. At the futures exchanges, trading is dominated by paper contracts, that is, mere promises, just like any piece of paper. But paper is not metal. Look here, imagine you have a silver certificate and demand physical delivery, but all you get in response is, sorry, force majeure, here, take paper money instead. And that's usually hidden in the fine print. That means in most cases, there will be no physical delivery. Instead, you receive paper money, or maybe even nothing at all, if you're lucky. And now here's a little silver comparison, which actually shocked me a bit. Amazon, just a single company, so Amazon on the right side, just one company, is worth more on the stock market than all the silver humanity has ever mined throughout its entire history. $2.3 trillion versus $2.1 trillion worth of silver on the left side. That means a single company versus thousands of years of human labor. This also shows just how undervalued silver still is. But on the other hand, the stock market is extremely inflated. And remember what happens when the paper facade collapses. Then, as I mentioned earlier, a short squeeze occurs. This also means that large market participants who bet on falling prices suddenly have to panic buy and cover their positions. And this buying pressure acts like a turbocharger, pushing prices even higher, just like in 2021, when millions of small investors simultaneously turned to physical silver and prices shot up. I would only describe it as a small taste of what's to come in the future. Today, these short positions in silver are much larger. For example, the stockpiles at trading venues like the COMEX are much smaller, but demand is many times higher. Because now even the central banks are on board. Now they're not just acquiring physical gold, but are also showing a very strong interest in physical silver. That means the upward movement has only just begun. To wrap up, let's take a look at the purchasing power of households in relation to gold. It's always interesting in these webinars to take a close look at purchasing power as well, specifically how gold has developed in this regard. So, in 1990, the average US household was still able to set aside over 6 ounces of gold per year. In 2011, it was just over 2. By 2025, it's barely more than 1 ounce. Now the question is, are we really earning that much more, or is our money just losing value faster and faster? Is it being devalued? This clearly shows that gold is gaining value, while cash is losing value. That's exactly why you should take action now. So buy real assets. From my perspective, the trend is clearly visible. In US dollars, gold is almost 90% above its 2011 high. And that's why I continue to expect that by the end of 2025, the price per ounce will reach the $4,000 mark. Before I hand things back over to the control room and we move on to the Q&A session, I have prepared a small gift for you. gold. In the periodic table, it has the number 79. You can also see that on the left. And precisely on 7-9. On the right side, we had an all-time high for gold. So coincidences do still happen. And exactly for this occasion and gold day on 7-9, I have prepared a special offer for you. Because right now, when you purchase a single ounce gold Krugerrand, which is also the oldest and most well-known investment coin in the world, you will receive an exclusive discount of 40 euros. And you can order this coin right now in our web shop and take advantage of this discount. And with this offer, I'll hand things back over to the control room and look forward to your questions. Thank you very much from my side.
Absolutely, Mr. Dragoljevich. Thank you again for the excellent presentation and the fascinating information. I think everyone is interested in this, including myself, even though I deal with gold every day. You always get this insider knowledge here, which is hard to find in the mainstream media. So thank you for that. We have already reached the final item on the agenda. And before we get started with that, I have a very, very important piece of information for all new viewers. For everyone who thinks, wow, what the experts at Goldvorsorge are presenting here is really cool and I want more of it, I have set up a very special page for you. Let's take a look at it together.
Welcome to GVS Rusin, your central hub for everything related to precious metals. From gold and silver to the secure storage of valuable assets. Discover exciting news, insightful interviews with experts, and in-depth articles on current developments in the world of precious metals and finance. In addition, you will find all the details about our live webinars, including dates, topics, and speakers, as well as access to complete recordings of past webinars anytime and without restriction. GVS Wissen, your guide through complex financial markets.
Yes, thank you to the control room for displaying that. And we won't hesitate. I asked the control room to bring the experts back on stage. And we'll get started right away with the first question. They're slowly coming in now. Yes, Mr. Dragoljevich, Mr. Bachheimer, and Mr. Trinker. Mr. Bachheimer is probably still taking a short break, and then he'll definitely be with us as well. The first question is for Mr. Dragoljevich anyway, so we can get started right away. Silver has reached a 14-year high in euros, but remains below its high in USD, that is, in US dollars. What is behind this discrepancy? I think it's easy to say, Mr. Dragoljevich, it's probably the exchange rate.
Absolutely right. Thank you, dear Stefan. So it's simply due to the exchange rate. Calculated in euros, silver appears stronger because the dollar has recently weakened or is currently weak. On top of that, in Europe and in pounds, this old high has already been surpassed, but not yet in dollars. So the reason is not that silver is better here than there, but that the exchange rate and demand have different effects in different regions.
All right, thank you for answering. Next question, Mr. Trinker. Russia has just attacked Poland. What is Goldvorsorge's view on this?
Yes, well, that's correct. As dramatic as it sounds, it is actually true. Poland is well armed, so I'm not worried about that. And Germany doesn't need to worry either, I can reassure all of you, because the Russians would never do that, attack Germany. Besides, there are no resources to gain, just a pile of debt, as we've heard today. But jokes aside, it's a serious topic. Dear Poles, especially the viewers as well, Goldvorsorge is now also available in Poland with high security storage. We are here for you. So dear Poles, if you want security for your precious metals, then please do get in touch with me or with Mr. Bachheimer for secure and reliable storage in a safe and stable country. And dear Thomas, perhaps you might have one or two additional words to add to that, or something further to elaborate upon about the supposed attack that has now taken place?
Yes, I do. Yes, why should the Russians do that? First of all, there were already 2 deaths in Poland a few years ago. That was a misdirected missile. This now looks more intentional. I'm actually in a way doubly affected. I have a Polish wife, was in Poland last week. No, 2 weeks ago. But the thing is, the Poles don't like the Russians. Historically, they haven't really liked them, but they don't really like the Ukrainians anymore either. And we know that just last week we made a video about it. The Polish president cut child aid for Ukrainian children if their parents aren't working. And there's kind of a refugee fatigue in Poland. People are just tired of having to support the Ukrainians here because of the evil Russians. So you can be evil on both sides. But there's one thing that needs to be said. My wife showed me this today. After the news about the attack by ETA came out, my wife immediately checked her Polish social media, and someone asked, "Who do you think it was?" in Polish. And at the time I checked, there were 130 responses. And even for me, even though I don't speak Polish, it was very easy to read. 127 of them said it was the Ukrainians. That's pretty interesting. But in general, an attack on Poland would be a turning point for Europe if it really happened. And if it wasn't an accident, but the reflexive assigning of blame shows just how deep the divisions already run in people's minds. If the Poles and the Polish people, for the most part, suspect Ukraine, even though historically they have had a greater antipathy toward the Russians than toward any other nation on earth, then this reflects a distrust of the official narratives. It shows. So it now remains open whether this is a military fact or an information war. But we do know that both could be devastating, and we hope that it won't turn out that way.
All right, gentlemen, thank you for your assessments. Let's move on. Anton Kobiakov has claimed that the USA could massively reduce its national debt with crypto by devaluation. But what would that actually mean? What would that mean for gold, Mr. Bachheimer?
Well, we've already discussed this once before in one of the early webinars when if the USA were to actually start reducing its national debt through stable coins or other cryptos and similar constructs, then that would simply mean that trust in the classic US dollar as a debt and reserve currency would be definitively and fundamentally undermined. Consequences for gold: flight. When trust is gone, people turn to hard assets. Anyone holding international dollar reserves, central banks, funds, oligarchs, millionaires, you and me, will naturally ask themselves, do I want to stay in a devaluing stablecoin digital dollar, or would I rather move into something that can't be arbitrarily increased? And of course, we all know what that is. As diligent Gold Thread webinar participants, everyone should know what can't be endlessly multiplied. There could be short-term competition between the digital dollar and gold. Because the crypto dollar seems a bit sexy and maybe a few young hipsters will jump in. But as soon as it becomes clear that it's just a tool for debt relief and nothing else, gold will win out again in the medium term. The markets would then have to reassess real purchasing power. Gold would clearly establish itself as the standard of value, probably with a massive price jump upwards. So even worse than it is now with the dollar, the whole thing would skyrocket with the crypto dollar. Because who would sell their gold savings for crypto? There won't be many, especially not for a government-issued crypto. So I would really have my doubts about that. Beyond that, it would send a strong signal to the BRICS countries, because if the US openly admits that it has to digitally cook its debt soft, then Russia and China and the others would have a joker up their sleeve. They could push gold as an honest alternative. That's why I come to the same conclusion now as I did back then. Government debt via stablecoins? No way. That's just as silly as if the French went to the IMF. It's not going to happen.
Thank you for the explanation. Next question. What happens if the EU demands customer data from Goldvorsorge? Mr. Trinker, of course.
Yes, well, in my experience, no one is really interested in customer data. It might be the case in the future that every citizen has to declare everything themselves, but that's another story. But customer data alone doesn't really say anything. Furthermore, the disclosure of customer data is legally prohibited. There are strict data protection laws. That's why we're not worried, because it's protected in this way. Besides, we're in Austria and Austrian law applies here. The EU can't even demand that. Then for anyone who is still worried, I can offer another reassurance. Then they simply store it in Dubai. Thomas is here today as well, joining us live from Dubai. Dubai, as he can confirm, is far outside the EU. And even in terms of flight hours, it's quite far away. If you're now referring your question to their storage, I would also like to add that everything is, of course, taxed. As I already mentioned in my talk today, first you pay 50% and then you pay another 20% in value-added tax. So there's really nothing left over. And you've paid multiple times the amount in taxes. The state really has no way to intervene here. Motivation to take even more away. Personally, I see that more as doomsaying and not very realistic. The state is already quite satisfied with you for giving it everything, basically almost everything. But of course, there's always the freedom to emigrate. You're always welcome to store your assets in Dubai or in Singapore for that matter. Switzerland, for all those who might still want to drive there by car, shouldn't be underestimated. Switzerland is playing in the top league, but thank you for the question.
All right, thank you for your assessment. Next question, will we see triple-digit silver prices soon, Jeze, or is the current rally only temporary? Perhaps Mr. Bachheimer or maybe Mr. Dragojevic would also like to comment on that.
Yes, I'd be happy to say something about that. There's a video with me and Michael Ross where in a lighthearted moment, I said that by the end of the decade, so by the end of 2030, gold would be at 800. I still believe that. It's not a fairy tale, it's a mathematical consequence. The question was about silver, sorry, not gold. The only question is when the lid will come off. The current rally may seem like a flash in the pan for many people, but if we now break through the all-time high in both major currency systems, then it's a much bigger process. And above all, it's a process of de-dollarization. Silver is actually the underestimated explosive factor in all of this. Industrially, it is indispensable, as Dragojevic already explained today, but it is also monetarily suppressed like an unwanted stepchild. If the manipulators lose control, the jump from the current $40 to $100 could happen faster than the bankers can say the word COMEX. And that's what I wish for you as well, because they've played around too much and manipulated prices too much, or rather, they consider international silver markets as their own property. So there will be temporary setbacks. Triple-digit prices are just a matter of time. Probably not in a matter of just a few days, but certainly within a few months, it's definitely possible for me to achieve this. And in a few short years, we'll be just shy of 4 digits, a truly significant milestone.
Yes, so I'm going to jump in here as well. At this point, I can also agree with Tal. 800, yes, it will still take a little while, but as for the current situation, I already mentioned it a bit in my presentation. On the one hand, we have an inflated paper market, which is even more extreme than with gold. Secondly, we have a constant supply deficit. That means we now also have new players in the market who have jumped on the silver bandwagon. These are now not just the industrial players, but also to a large extent private buyers as well as central banks and governments. So they are now also hoarding huge amounts of physical gold, and this will lead from one thing to another. And when a significant silver short squeeze inevitably happens, or when the paper market as we know it truly comes to a definitive end at some point in the foreseeable future, we will then very quickly and certainly find ourselves moving into that particular and crucial area. Speaking now in the long term over the years, in the short term, I would say we are definitely heading above $50 and that it will settle somewhere around $70 or $80. But if all the arguments I've just mentioned actually come to pass and things get even more extreme, then of course we will very quickly see triple-digit prices.
That's good news to hear. I think that statement will really please our viewers. We're curious to see what awaits us. Next question. In China, a law was recently passed that requires large insurance companies to invest 1% in physical gold. There are absolutely no initiatives like this coming from the EU. Why isn't gold important to the EU, or are they actually doing something? And I just don't know, Mr. Dragojevic.
Yes, well, you're not the only one who doesn't know. I also keep wondering why the EU isn't doing anything, but I would say that's a typical sign of how important citizens actually are. Because when citizens are unimportant, they only serve as taxpayers, I would say. But on the other hand, there are also countries, for example, where Thomas is sitting right now, where citizens actually have rights and where the state acts for the benefit of its citizens. Another example, even if we stay within the EU, is Hungary. Many people are always criticizing Hungary, our neighbor. but Hungary acts for the benefit of its citizens, and that should be acknowledged here as well. Let me give you a current example. All women who, for instance, have 3 children do not pay any income tax. So I think that's a law that was enacted for the benefit of the citizens. In many neighboring countries, you quickly end up paying 50% income tax. Christian also mentioned this in his presentation. And these are exactly the kinds of facts that not many people know about. Many Asian countries, on the other hand, even offer free financial education. I've spoken with many of our Asian partners, and they report that currently a lot of free financial training is being offered in their countries as well. Where do we have something like that in Europe, for example? Here, people prefer to focus on digital experiments like the e-euro. Unfortunately, gold hardly plays any role in these political debates. And of course, I would wish, so to speak, that we also had more initiatives here. That's why we do this as well. We're based in Austria, after all, and that's why we hold webinars and take this initiative. If it can't be done at the EU level, then we make sure to provide you with all this information on these topics free of charge. And of course, at the end of the day, it's always important in the long term to have physical assets, real assets, in order to secure your wealth and not just save it in a bank account, which loses value in the long run and which, let's say, is always being pushed on us by politics, so to speak.
Mr. Bachheimer, Trump is considering gold-backed government bonds, which actually sounds great, but why or what could cause something like this to fail? What problems are there with implementing this?
The questioner is already on the right track. There must be problems. So gold-backed government bonds certainly sound very appealing, especially to someone who works freelance at the Gold Standard Institute and like a return to soundness. But of course, as the questioner already suspected, there are quite a few pitfalls to look for and to find behind this. First of all, while the US officially owns about 8,000 tons of gold or so, this has never been audited, or at least no audit is available. There are only a few photos from the years 1957, 1973, and 2017 with some senators who were inside and some gold bars in the background. That's not enough to trust the government when it sells gold-backed bonds. Second, real gold backing would immediately force higher interest rates because debts can no longer be diluted at will, and if this is done quickly and nationwide, it would destroy the markets. And third, the markets would immediately test whether Washington can actually deliver and would want to exchange, which could lead to panic if the vault is empty. And now we come to the point we already discussed in a previous webinar that there are some states that possess gold and issue government bonds, and my colleague from the US Gold Standard Institute played a leading role in the United States and helped these states. And since I didn't contribute to this, I can be very proud of the Gold Institute. But this was truly a milestone because we have to keep one thing in mind here. The viewer's question is, of course, a good one, but we need to think about it the other way around. If the US states, because they have greater budgetary sovereignty than, for example, the states in Germany or the provinces in Austria, that means they have significantly more revenue and much more autonomy in spending. There are some states, not just gold-producing ones, that already have gold in their coffers, and these are easier to audit. And in most cases, they are audited. I would have confidence in them. That means I wouldn't create gold-backed bonds in a top-down manner, but rather if a conglomerate of states is organized like the United States, which after all are called the United States, so it's more of a bottom-up organization, then those who are trustworthy, such as Utah, Florida, the Allegheny states, maybe Texas, could issue such bonds. And in that case, it could indeed be quite successful. And what could be an interesting side effect is the fact that if these states are successful, they could really generate economic growth, and then perhaps the others would voluntarily follow suit without cross-subsidization, as is the case in Germany, where everyone sends money to Berlin. Lifting up the whole country that way is a bit more complex, but that's my topic. I have to shape things that way.
Of course, we understand that. Thank you for that. I plan to leave Germany over the course of next year. Mr. Trinker, please get ready.
Wonderful.
Where I want to live then, I don't know yet. I have quite a bit of gold. What tips do you have for me? You're in exactly the right place, dear viewer, because Mr. Trinker talks about this in every webinar.
Thank you very much for the great question. Not just every webinar, but almost every day I talk to clients who have already taken this step or want to, and no one has ever regretted it. On the contrary, I congratulate you on it. Germany is certainly a great country, but you can live somewhere else for a while or even forever. There are so many great countries. I could talk about them for hours, but that's exactly the service we offer you. You're basically the ideal customer because you can simply store all the gold and silver you already own in our high security storage, and then you can travel around the world however and wherever you like. With your storage, you've essentially created your own ticket to freedom. We store your precious metals in a secure country. You can also let us know if you have specific preferences, and if the security situation in a country changes, we naturally make sure that your assets are always moved to a place where they remain safe. But the most important thing is that you have everything stored securely and can access it from anywhere in the world. And believe me, I have clients from every continent, from almost every country in the world. As long as there's a phone or email somewhere, you can enter your information in the web shop or call us. The internet was built for nuclear war anyway. So it's available everywhere. You can always reach us and we will transfer money to you no matter where you are. You can conquer the world, you can get to know the world, take a vacation, travel somewhere, and if you like it, stay there. If not, go somewhere else. But in the background, you have us and the security that no one else knows. You own gold and silver. You can also move about freely in countries with a large gap between rich and poor because no one knows. You know that you have stored it with us. It is securely stored and you are extremely flexible. And if you really need it physically, we can arrange something and even send it to you. So congratulations.
Get in touch with us. I'm looking forward to it. Exactly. We've already displayed the contact details. Feel free to reach out by email or phone in the next few days, or even right now if you prefer. We're still here right now. I think I have 7 employees in the next room spread out across the offices who are still handling the chats from you, dear viewers. We've received countless questions from you again, and I'm curious to see if we can get through all of them today. In any case, we're here for you. Just use the contact details you're seeing right now. Next question. James Rickards wrote in a recently published article roughly this sentence: the point is that paper gold is leveraged about 100 to 1 compared to physical gold, including Fort Knox. I would tend to believe him, but how can this claim be independently verified, Mr. Bachheimer?
I'm glad you gave me this question. I met Jim Rickards 2 years ago at the Dubai Precious Metals Conference, and I have to mention this briefly on a personal note because it was one of my private highlights. I was going up the escalator and he was coming down and we crossed paths. I said, "Interview?" And he turns around because he was already moving further down, turns to me and says, "Yes, of course, come by downstairs in an hour. I'll talk to you." I said, "Thank you. How did I get so lucky?" And he said, "Well, you're the Austrian gold apocalypse or app, whatever, aren't you?" Or some word like that. And of course, I'll always remember that he recognized me on an escalator. Still, I have to say, Rickards's claim isn't really plausible, to be honest. For all the skepticism toward US gold data, just as the government might be wrong, maybe Mr. Rickards is wrong too. Because of the lack of transparency, we can never really verify whether Rickards is right or not. At best, you can look at COMEX data like open interest statistics, and you could compare those to the registered stocks. That gives you in some weeks a ratio of 5 to 1, in other weeks 100 to 1. But we don't know the whole picture, especially with Fort Knox, because the questioner mentioned Fort Knox or included Fort Knox, and with Fort Knox, we know absolutely nothing. There could be nothing or everything in there or even more. As mentioned earlier, it hasn't been comprehensively audited, so there's really no point in speculating about it. You can't clearly prove that the coverage is there, but you also can't prove that it's 100 to 1 over a longer period. In some weeks, I even believe it, or we know for sure that's the case, but over the long term and across the entire gold world, you can't say that. But Mr. Rickards probably knows more than little Mr. Bachheimer.
Yes, a very funny story, and I think it's one you'll always remember. It's also quite interesting for the viewers, and it even counts as insider knowledge. Yes, exactly. That's something you're allowed to have, even if you're Mr. Bachheimer. Have you seen the video on X of the Venezuelan supermarket that lists all its prices in gold? You can also see people paying with gold flakes, which are weighed at the checkout. I'm inspired to implement something similar in my own store. I'd love to start an initiative and would appreciate your advice or tips. Whoever among you would like to share. Yes, Mr. Bachheimer, please.
I know a store with 16 branches that actually prices its goods, in this case gold, in euros, and gives out the gold, not the other way around. So they give out the gold, not the goods, and price it in euros. That's a respectable store because they take your payment and give you gold in return. The other stores, this is highly interesting from the perspective of the Gold Standard Institute, might not really be comprehensible because gold is good money, and good money is preferred as a store of value, and people would rather be convinced to keep it. Still, it's a nice initiative. Of course, you can generate a lot of TikTok videos and a lot of publicity if you do this. It's cooler than anything else. But I personally prefer a business like Goldvorsorge, which does it the other way around. They price their goods, their gold, in euros and provide people with gold.
Yes, I think so too. Next question. I have a lot of gold and want to move it to Dubai to remain as anonymous as possible. What should I do? So that Mr. Bachheim doesn't always have to answer, even though it's a Dubai question, let's have Mr. Trink respond.
Gladly, I can answer that briefly and concisely. Congratulations on your gold. Well done. We can certainly plan and organize everything for you. Just write to us, send us the details by email, or simply give us a call. We'll take care of everything. We just need a few pieces of information from you, but we can discuss that privately, just the two of us, or face to face, or however we end up meeting. But we're happy to do it. I look forward to hearing from you.
Absolutely. Mr. Trinker is, of course, available for you every day, and Mr. Trinker's colleagues as well. We've made sure to have plenty of staff available for storage matters. Next question. Can we deduce from history how much longer the euro will last? Given the digital euro, we're probably still quite a ways off from that. Mr. Bachheimer.
Deducing information from historical records, that is truly a very difficult and challenging matter to undertake. I would say no, you can't deduce that. I don't know of any historical comparison, especially since we have a problem with the euro. We have it spread across several different nations, encompassing various economic systems, and indeed, history does not really know anything quite like that, except perhaps for the notable Latin Monetary Union, which existed and operated effectively between the 1800s and the early 1900s. But there is one thing we can deduce, just came to mind. Greece was also involved back then, but the whole thing was regulated under the gold standard, or more precisely, bimetallism. And back then, gold to silver was set at a ratio of 1 to 14. And only the clever Greeks were the first, or among the first, to drop out again, because they got caught cheating. They had already changed it, shifting the ratio from 1 to 14 to 1 to 16, which caused disruptions, and that was the first so-called euro experiment. But there were also South American currencies involved. You should know that too, and it failed. Basically, every currency union fails, except when history shows that there is no collapse. Austria and Germany are an example. We didn't have the same currency, but there was a close link at a ratio of 1 to 7. It would be roughly the same. But this is only possible because of a theory by Robert Mundell, who was awarded the Nobel Prize for it at the time. Currency unions or shared currencies only work if there is a high level of exchange of goods, labor, culture, and also tolerance toward the neighboring states. That means I can only form a currency union when I am ready to marry my sister to someone from the other country. At the moment, I am not willing to do that with any country in Europe. My sister was lucky enough to marry an Austrian, and that's why, this is my historical conclusion, apart from the shilling and the mark, which weren't even a common currency but were pegged to each other, there is no meaningful currency union. That's my conclusion. Therefore, this is going to go down the drain. All the best to those who welcome the euro with flags. We were never part of that, and that's a good thing. Ladies and gentlemen.
It's also important to keep in mind that new solutions are already being developed in the background. Among other things, yes, we already know all of this. So it's nothing new that there will be some changes, whether it's the digital euro or the Alpine euro, Alpine dollar, or something along those lines. work is already being done in the background, I would say, to gain even more control. And historically speaking, I agree with either Dubuchair or Thomas. There aren't any historical data where you can say that exactly, but it's already underway.
There are failure data.
That's right.
Exactly. A clear statement from Mr. Bachheimer. Next question. I've heard that bonded warehouses aren't safe because, in a way, you're putting things in the hands of the state. Is that true, Mr. Trinker?
No, that's not true. There is often misinformation being spread, as is often the case. What is true, however, is that bonded warehouses are high security facilities where goods are also stored duty-free. That's all there is to it. Before the goods actually, let's say, legally enter the country, they are stored in this warehouse and must first be classified and processed for tax purposes. And only when the goods are officially imported does the customs officer get involved. But they only come to handle the taxes, so to speak, to collect the customs duties. Otherwise, if it is not imported, it remains in the bonded warehouse, which, by the way, is also a high security facility. Those are the basic principles. So only the customs officer has access, no one else, and we at Goldvorsorge handle all the processing, and the customs officer doesn't have any customer data anyway. That's why bonded warehouses are 100% secure. So you really don't need to worry about that. But still, that's a good question. You never know, but it really is just as I described. So you can confidently buy into the bonded warehouse. I even
recommend it to you. Yes, exactly. That's why we have this Q&A session, so we can clarify exactly these uncertainties or possible misunderstandings. Next question. How will my home loan, specifically a fixed interest rate, behave if the current monetary system collapses? Mr. Dragovic?
Yes. Basically, in the long term, interest rates will rise. So when you look at the interest rate, a fixed rate is always a good choice because you never really know what the interest rate game will do next. But in the long term, interest rates will rise. And with a fixed rate, you also benefit in the case of currency devaluation or in the case of inflation. However, there is the risk that in the event of a currency reform, a loan could be converted in a very disadvantageous way, usually to the benefit of the hidden players, I would say. And furthermore, every loan agreement states that the fixed interest rate can also be terminated under certain conditions, resulting in a variable interest rate. And if this happens during a period of sharply rising interest rates due to a currency reform, you could lose your home very quickly. So that's something you have to take into account.
Yes, I think that's a very clear answer. Next question. Is it better to buy silver coins or silver bars and store them in a high security vault? What are the advantages of one over the other? This question goes to a drinker. Maybe I can add something to that. There's differential taxation, standard taxation, a lot of confusion. Maybe you can include that as well, right? In your answer?
Exactly. So the most important thing is always the small denomination. Small denominations might be a bit more expensive, but when it comes to silver, it's actually the case that silver coins, which for me represent the right small denomination to answer it that way, can definitely compete in price with all the other options. So you just need to look at the purchase and buyback prices and compare them with bars. So the coins definitely keep up in that regard. They have the right small denomination, and of course, they offer the greatest flexibility. If you have enough coins, you can also buy larger silver bars. I emphasize larger ones. How much of the smaller denominations you plan for also depends on your circumstances. How much money you want to spend, how many people you want to provide for, what your actual income is, and so on. But basically, it should also be said that if you buy larger quantities of silver, you should definitely store them in a duty-free warehouse at 0% tax. Anything else would be a waste of your hard-earned money. And regarding what Stepan mentioned earlier, differential taxation and standard taxation, that applies to you if you don't buy in a bonded warehouse. But even then, it's still best to stick with coins. There are still always coins available that are subject to differential taxation. The tax rate there is considerably lower, more than half less than with standard taxation. Standard taxation is nothing other than 19 or 20%, depending on whether it's in Germany or Austria. So once again, briefly, is it better to buy silver coins or silver bars? I recommend silver coins. They offer greater flexibility. You can buy them with differential taxation if you purchase them domestically. And you can also keep up with prices more easily. If you're buying in large quantities, buy it in a duty-free warehouse. And there you can also purchase large bars. And if all of this was too confusing, that's okay. Just get in touch with us. We are happy to advise you on your purchase.
Yes, Mr. Trinker, thank you very much. Now we have another real estate question. How do you see the situation in the real estate market? There are a lot of reports about insolvencies. Should I rent out my property or sell it? Mr. Dragoljuvic.
Yes, first of all, we are precious metals experts, the three of us. And for this question, we would really recommend bringing in a true real estate specialist because this area is extremely complex and also very demanding. In addition, you should also consult a tax specialist so that in the end you come out well. Because anyone who owns a property today can, of course, generate rental income, but must also take into account the need to constantly set aside reserves for repairs, for vacancies, for higher taxes, and for political interventions that could happen at any time. So my recommendation is there is a simpler alternative: gold and silver. Gold and silver are stored tax-free in high security vaults, require zero effort, no repairs, no tenants, and no administration. That means everything is straightforward. You don't have to do anything, yet you have guaranteed value protection and don't need to worry about a thing. And as I already mentioned earlier in the presentation, gold has already increased by 37% in price within a year, gone up. And here's something else interesting. I often talk to Christian internally, and he also tells me very frequently that many clients are currently selling their properties and investing in gold and silver. So maybe Christian can share a bit more about that.
Absolutely. So I congratulate everyone, and it's true. Every day, not just one property, but constantly someone is selling a property and sometimes even getting a really good price for it. I congratulate them because now is the time for commodities, not for real estate anymore. As for real estate, without pretending to be a prophet, there's still a lot that's going to happen, and many people will regret not having sold earlier. But you have to do the math for yourself. Have everything calculated, and if you then decide to sell your property, come to us. Of course, you have to make the decision yourself because you know all the details, and I always wish everyone the best of luck who manages to do it. But that's actually true. I have all kinds of scenarios. There's the small apartment that you just sell, or the huge house you can no longer afford but manage to sell really well. Put it into gold. That's the best option. But as I said, contact us and we'll help you.
Thank you. What if I own gold, but only the digital euro is officially valid? Who can actually do anything with gold? Mr. Trinker, maybe once more.
Well, if you stored it with us, yes, then we can already transport it to a non-EU country. That would basically solve the problem. The digital euro, I've talked about it today. There are actually 120 CBDCs just waiting to be released. They're all coming. They will definitely come. That doesn't change the fact that you have gold. It belongs to you. No one can take it away from you, and the regular euro will continue to exist for a while. One won't replace the other right away. To put it plainly, the digital euro won't eat up your gold. But of course, if you want to be prepared, you can already store it outside the EU. With gold, I can guarantee you that. For thousands of years, people have known what to do with gold. The little digital euro won't change that, so don't let anyone scare you. Be proud that you own gold, and there will always be a solution for everything.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Now we have a question about the USA. The USA hasn't revalued its gold reserves since 1973. $42 per ounce. A few months ago, there was a huge fuss about tariffs and the fact that the USA was close to a national bankruptcy. Wouldn't a revaluation solve all these problems, Mr. Barr?
Well, absolutely not. First of all, alchemists in the accounting departments. Yes, because a revaluation, I don't actually revalue the gold, but I just revalue, that's all. So in reality, I'm just dressing up the balance sheet. That's the first thing. I have another problem as well. If we look at the current gold reserves, they're around 11 or 12 billion US dollars. If we revalue them now, we end up somewhere around 850 billion. That sounds like an enormous sum. But the Americans are paying interest of 1 trillion. That means it wouldn't even cover the interest payments for a single year. That's the first thing. And the second is, of course, you could say yes, but then people believe it and are more willing to lend money to the Americans, but that doesn't help either because then they just go even further into debt. So unless I pass a law and say I'm revaluing it now, I really have it. Because what do you think is the reason it's stuck down at $42? It's because every accounting clerk, every junior in accounting says, well, you have to see the gold first before you can revalue it. And that's why it's at $42, so that no one can see it. But if that were to work, if the Americans were somehow able to gather up the gold, assemble it, whatever, and they could revalue it, then you'd have to pass a law so that the Americans, or rather the politicians, could economically lay the groundwork for a new start and, well, pay back debts or, well, not put it into the social system. That may sound insanely harsh, but you only get this opportunity once in a lifetime. And with the 850 to 900 billion US dollars that the revaluation would bring, maybe you could give the economy a bit of a boost. On the other hand, we know that Trump passed that package. He allocated 500 billion for artificial intelligence. So in the end, it doesn't really help. And we really have to look at why the Americans are keeping it down there. So this is just window dressing on the balance sheet. And they simply don't dare to admit that they have a huge amount of gold. That's why they can't revalue it. And of course, it's also a bit of power politics. A lower book value keeps the gold inconspicuous and under the radar. And if they were to revalue it, it would once again give gold the aura of a reserve currency, and then we'd be back to the gold standard debate and so on and so forth. So they say everything is just like in 1973, everything is stable, nothing has changed, and that's how America thrives. I think the revaluation would actually be enough to truly be debt-free. I once had to calculate, especially in the spring, if it were 100% now, maybe a bit less because the gold price has risen. In comparison, yes, Russia would be debt-free, the Chinese would be debt-free, and the Russians as well. So much for the topic of Russia is bankrupt and will soon disappear from the stage of history financially. No, it will not. Orcus, not orbit.
Yes, thank you. Next question. Let's see what else we have here. There's still quite a bit of material left. So a question for Goldvorsorge. Does Goldvorsorge itself invest in Bitcoin or digital currencies? Yes, that's a classic Trinker question because he talks about it all the time.
Yes, well, as I've already said, Bitcoin is basically a fake copy of gold, from mining and extraction to the gold color and even being limited in supply. And all the Bitcoin fans probably won't like me much for saying this, but I can guarantee it to everyone. Goldvorsorge reinvests every profit immediately into physical precious metals like gold and silver. So real gold and real silver, because if you want to gamble, if you like gambling, you go to the casino and have a fun night. But here at Goldvorsorge, we only invest in real security. That's very important. We also have no debt. We are debt-free. All the money that comes in is immediately reinvested, but not in Bitcoin, rather in the product on which we have built our company, our business. Because Goldvorsorge is built on gold and silver. Bitcoins have their function, and that's what I tried to explain to you today. Bitcoin is part of the financial system, which is more or less in its final phase. Let's see how much longer it will continue. Bitcoin will certainly delay and prolong it, but money is already unlimited, and at some point it will inevitably come to an end. But yes, I can guarantee you that we do not invest in Bitcoin, but rather in gold and silver, as it should be.
Thank you
For the question.
Yes, of course, in the end, because precious metals are the only thing that is and remains enduring. Next question for Mr. Bachheimer. The super rich collect passive income in the millions and are buying up all the real estate from the middle class, or are driving up the prices of all other investment assets. Do the Social Democrats have a point that new taxes could provide a solution? In the news, you always only hear that the refugees are to blame for everything, which the rich, like Elon Musk, eagerly promote. Mr. Bach?
Yes, Mr. Billig, since you are aiming so directly at me with this question, I have to clarify right away. I do not belong to the super rich nor to the rich, but I am happy to answer this question nonetheless. Taxes.
And also not to the Social Democrats, right?
That will most probably become abundantly clear from my detailed answer to your question.
Just a joke on the side. EA.
Yes, but I think, comrades, that I'm not necessarily the most ardent of all the Reds. But let's get back to the topic. Taxes, that's the favorite thing of the socialists. They've never solved a problem. They've only ever created new problems. Just think about it in history. 100 years ago, the income tax was at 3%, and only 3% of employees paid it. That's roughly how it went. And now we're at 50% with bigger problems than we had 100 years ago. And when the super rich collect millions in passive income and buy real estate with it, that's not a result you can prevent with taxes. Rather, it's the result of policies of cheap interest rates and a flood of money controlled by central banks. And central, the word central bank, we know this, comes from the Communist Manifesto, so it's kind of a precursor to socialism, and it is never the result of a laissez-faire fiscal system. New taxes would only squeeze the middle class, while the truly wealthy already manage their assets through foundations, trusts, and offshore structures. Redirecting frustration toward refugees is, of course, a convenient distraction, and the fact that billionaires like Musk applaud it certainly doesn't make things any better. The problem doesn't lie in taxes being too low, but in a monetary system that automatically shifts wealth from the bottom to the top, dear socialists. And this monetary system, only socialists support it. No true libertarian and no truly independent mind stands for this kind of fiat system. Independent minds stand for the gold standard.
Yes, that's a clear answer. Then we talked a lot about the camps abroad, outside the EU. Maybe then a question about foreign bank accounts. Is it sensible to open a bank account outside the EU? Keyword CBDC, restrictions in order to be able to act financially when selling precious metals. About this account, Mr. Trinker.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. By the way, I get this question very, very often in various forms, and the answer is a clear yes, absolutely. And I have to admit, I have a bit of a selfish reason here. Please let me know how you managed it and where you did it. I'm happy to put some information together because there are many options, though I don't know all of them. Of course, there are possibilities in Dubai and so on, but in some countries it's easier, in others it's more difficult. But do it, you'll have much more flexibility, and you won't believe it, but there are actually many friendly countries where it's really not that hard. After all, it's your money, and you should be able to manage it however you want. I would be delighted if you manage to create something new somewhere and let me know. Maybe I can then pass that knowledge on to others.
Absolutely. So we still have a lot of questions, gentlemen, so please try to keep your answers a bit more concise so our viewers don't have to stay up until midnight. Next
question.
Yes, that's right. Next question. Thanks to Trump's 50% tariff against India, Modi reconciled with China at the last SAO summit, and even Putin seemed quite happy. Don't you also think that Trump should receive the Nobel Peace Prize for this? Yes, that's clear, Mr. Bachheimer.
Yes, that's a very, how should I put it, sarcastic question. Awarding the Nobel Peace Prize to Trump is about as likely as finding vegan sausages at a barbecue shop. His 50% tariffs drove India into China's arms. That was certainly not on his wish list. He previously used a sledgehammer approach, and I think he somewhat overlooked how determined India, China, Russia, and others are when they unite against Western hegemony, which is now in the process of dissolving. Of course, Putin is grinning, Xi is grinning, BRICS is becoming more tightly knit. We should somehow give Trump a Nobel Peace Prize, but the problem is already apparent, and I almost dare to predict this. Modi, who has always played a certain role and had to participate in BRICS but was leaning toward America, is now getting very cozy. And I dare say if he continues like this, I can almost guarantee that he will soon face a US-backed revolution like the ones we've seen around Russia and in the Balkans, a real colorful one. These color revolutions, they've had orange, sometimes yellow, pink, or with a fist symbol. We know this. At my age, you know it too, with 30 years of experience with the Americans. If something doesn't suit them, that's how these orchestrated revolutions get started. But this color revolution, I can guarantee you, it will be more colorful than any Bollywood film spectacle, and Modi won't even see how quickly he loses his office and American peacekeeping troops are in the country, because the revolution will spiral out of control and only the Americans will be able to contain it, which will once again undo all the Indians' attempts at liberation over the past 80 years. And then it won't be occupied by the British, but by the Americans.
All right, thank you for the answer. Next question. I am 75 years old, have sold all my financial products, and would like a recommendation on how I can now plan my retirement with gold. Mr. Trinker.
Thank you for the question. Happy birthday to you, and I extend my sincere congratulations on your thoughtful decision to sell off your paper products and, with great foresight, now convert everything you possess into valuable gold. I had a similar question earlier today in a different context, because I have such wonderful clients every day who are now really structuring their lives beautifully. Some aspire to emigrate, while others simply wish to fully embrace and enjoy life, bidding farewell to stress. And now life is coming to you. Enjoy it. Please feel free to call me or write to me at your earliest convenience, and we will certainly put together a truly good gold order for you with very practical and highly convenient denominations, because you will undoubtedly want to be able to receive both smaller and also larger amounts of gold. And then I'll tell you a bit about my many clients who have emigrated, give you a few tips, and after we've stored the gold for you and I've explained how the storage works, you'll know that you can access it from anywhere in the world. We can calmly discuss where we'll store it, whether that's Germany, Switzerland, Austria, or somewhere else, but you'll have access to it from anywhere and you can enjoy life. Take a vacation, go somewhere for a few days or a week and check it out. Maybe you'll like it. If you want to live there, go somewhere else, visit someone, get to know the world. You'll be amazed at how many wonderful countries are out there, because here, most of the time, we only hear negative reports. Only bad news is considered good news, so to speak. But the world is much better, much more beautiful, and much bigger than you can imagine. And now you've claimed this freedom for yourself, so enjoy it, and we're basically on standby. If you need anything, we're here for you. We'll transfer money to your account or credit card, and nothing can go wrong. Everything is perfectly invested in precious metals, so no economic or financial crisis can ever harm it. And if Germany gets on your nerves, then just say goodbye to Germany and move to the South Seas. Or I can give you a few tips on other places you could move to. So I look forward to hearing from you.
Exactly, Mr. Trinker also has some videos on this topic. Ticket to Freedom is one of them, which just comes to mind spontaneously. Otherwise, just check out our video library, and you're also welcome to get more detailed advice on this. The Chinese have learned to produce high-quality products at lower prices. In the automotive, mobile, and mechanical engineering sectors, we are no longer competitive. Is mass unemployment from 2026 inevitable, or can Europe somehow turn things around? Mr. Dragolevich?
Yes, well, basically many countries are developing rapidly and are focusing on expansion. The economic situation mainly concerns countries outside the EU, it should be noted. These countries are investing heavily in future developments, and that's certainly true for China as well. However, it must be taken into account that this is only possible if prosperity in one's own country has been secured. And above all, countries that have deliberately expanded their gold reserves significantly have secured this prosperity and are now focusing solely on important future issues. China, as an example, is showing the world in no uncertain terms through its technology and developments where the journey can lead. That's why they focus on low-cost production, among other things. And that's also why they are pioneers in many areas. Just looking at China specifically, they alone store over 74 million, according to official figures. In reality, there is likely much more stored in the basements of Beijing. On the other hand, countries that are now only focusing on secondary issues also need to face reality at some point. That's why it's much more important that you get involved today and secure your future independently of current events and not put your trust in politics, as Christian also nicely pointed out in his presentation.
All right, that's it about the Chinese. Let's move on. Which high security storage facility is better? Singapore, Dubai, or Switzerland, Mr. Trinker?
Wow, that's an interesting question. Of course, all three are equally secure and top-notch high security storage facilities, but each of them has slightly different, how should I put it, characteristics, let's say. The difference in storage fees is minimal. Singapore is a bit cheaper because we've been offering high security storage there for a very, very long time, for many years. In fact, we established ourselves there shortly after the financial crisis in 2009. By contrast, Switzerland is a bit more complicated, I'd say, because there is a lot of regulation in Switzerland. Many people have a connection to a particular location and want to store their assets there. There are many people who have obtained a visa or opened a bank account in Dubai, or who also have business there. In those cases, I definitely recommend the high security storage facility in Dubai, and everyone has their own particular approach to it. Recently, I've also had a lot of clients who want to store their assets outside the EU, but still want to be able to drive there by car. That's where Switzerland comes into play again. So all three options are equally good, I would say. But it does depend a bit on your own, how should I put it, flexibility and your personal life situation. And the best way to clarify that is in a personal consultation, as I have already invited you several times today to contact us so we can look at your situation individually. There, we can speak openly and freely. And we always find the absolutely right and most suitable solution for every single client, because everyone truly has their own unique philosophy. And I genuinely think you can really get very, very close to understanding precisely what each individual person truly needs. Yes, exactly. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Trinker. Next question. We have a CBDC question, which is, what will change for me when CBDCs are introduced? Mr. Bachheimer?
Not much, because they won't be coming, at least not on their own, but only as a parallel currency. That's just a hypothesis for now. They would only come in the form of being the sole currency. There would be a big difference. Right now, if you have a bank account, you have a claim against the bank. If it's CBDC, you have a claim against the central bank. That means the state, it's much closer to the state, the politicians, the government, whoever is in charge. They have much easier access to your bank account and can see much more clearly what's happening there. Every transaction can be tracked more easily, it can be limited more effectively, and in individual cases, it can be blocked. This leads once again to the famous conclusion we've mentioned here several times. CBDCs are a tool for the personalization of monetary policy. Negative interest rates, expiration dates, purpose-bound climate bonuses, everything can be tailored individually, not just on a broad structural level. For example, Mr. Batcher can be blocked from buying beer because Mr. Batcher once had elevated liver values. So personalized monetary policy, that's absolutely the most horrible thing. It's even more horrible than slavery in chains, because you're just as enslaved. It might not chafe your wrist, but it rubs you everywhere else. So hands off, never agree to it, and don't let yourself be bought, even if they send you euros from this filth to your app.
So Thomas, if I may add something here, I agree with you 100%. In the end, they will come. Everything will change. It will be a digital prison. Perfect, in a manner of speaking. So that would also be the ultimate surveillance tool. And the example with the liver and so on, well, you could say, okay, it's for your health, but that would be the positive approach. There are much more sinister considerations, like your money expiring if you don't spend it, and all sorts of things like that, and a lot of it will come. So the question for the dear listeners is, what will actually change? A lot will change. But at the same time, many things will stay the same, because I don't think everything else will just disappear. But I agree with you, it's actually a terrible development. Only they'll come one way or another, don't you think? Or do you believe they won't come?
Not as a single currency, meaning as a currency monopoly. I think as a parallel currency, you could definitely do something. Every chief gold supplier has had a pretty quick theory about that, and we've discussed it several times. But as a sole currency, I don't believe in it.
Because that would be a catastrophe. That would be...
But the thing is, you have to consider one thing. Why does something like this come about? Because people no longer trust the traditional currency, right? And then there's something that I can grasp even less, that's even more centralized than what we have now, and I'm supposed to trust that more. I mean,
you'd really have to be...
I think people are 4 times as gullible, perhaps, for that particular reason. So I really don't believe it at all.
Well, we'll definitely see. In the meantime, let's move on to the next question. Unfortunately, I had to stop watching your videos and also the other channels because they kept me in a constant state of panic. Of course, I've diligently saved gold and silver, but what else can I possibly do to truly ensure a peaceful and secure retirement? I am very sorry that we inadvertently put you in such a state of fear and apprehension, but I firmly believe Mr. Dragoljevich can effectively help calm you down again.
So you're addressing me with this, right? In any case, I'm sorry if that's the case. Actually, you've already done the most important thing. So you have gold and silver, and that's the most important thing for a peaceful retirement. What else can you do? In any case, make sure that you always stay connected to your precious metals and continue to build up your reserves, because that way you will live in freedom. So it's important always to be prepared and to plan for the long term. With precious metals, no matter what the big players and the secretive ones do, your precious metals won't lose value, and you can always sleep soundly. That's my appeal, my message.
All right, next question. Why do so many people store in Hungary, Mr. Trinker?
Why do so many people store in Hungary? Interesting question. In fact, for those who don't know, we have a high security vault in Budapest that is very, very popular. And you have to maybe look at this from a certain perspective. There are a lot of countries in the EU that are very pro-Europe. Yes, and then there are also some countries that are against the EU, and that changes from time to time. It's not always clear-cut. To be clear, at the moment, Hungary is, let's say, kind of like in Asterix and Obelix, the Gallic village that somehow resists everything, but it's still part of the EU. And for all those who don't want to be outside the EU, who want to stay in the EU, but disagree with many things happening in the EU, they like to take refuge in this Gallic village. Of course, Hungary isn't a Gallic village. It's not in France. It's located somewhere completely different. But that's just how it's perceived a bit. And so people like to be in that country, which both in perception and in reality often doesn't go along with everything the EU imposes on some other countries. So it's a very interesting story. And then there is also, at precisely the same time, a completely different and distinct historical component to consider, because historically speaking, the Germans have always maintained a very, very warm, amicable, and genuinely good relationship with Hungary. This stems from the division of Germany into East and West. It comes from that era, and it still lives on. The more important thing, so to speak, is that while you remain in the EU, you are somewhat among those who don't go along with everything. Of course, that could change again, but it's certainly a very interesting option.
Why do central banks store their gold? Often in other countries, actually. Mr. Dragoljevich, this is perfect for you. You recently had a video on this, I think about a week ago. Is that right?
Exactly, that's right. So I'd be happy to repeat it here for you. Very good question. The reasoning goes a bit back into the past, I would say. There used to be the following reasoning. The major trading centers are in New York and London, and the countries that needed to act quickly would buy or sell there. They kept their gold there and usually exchanged it for other currencies. In most cases, that meant US dollars. That sounds practical and logical, but that was in the past. Today, as we know, no one really trusts the US dollar, and part of this gold has even long since been lent out. It was used or even pledged as collateral in dubious deals by those countries. That means it's mostly just available on paper there, or perhaps not even physically present anymore. Yes, everyone talks about stability and trust, but in reality, the gold is no longer at home, so to speak, but entangled somewhere within the system. A market always has its ups and downs, we know that. But history shows that secure phases are always followed by insecure ones. And in uncertain times, no one is willing to give up their gold. That means if you keep your gold in London or New York, it becomes difficult in such times. That's exactly why we always say, if you want real security, you should always store your precious metals yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Draguljevic, for your answer. So we still have a few more questions. At this point, I would like to thank everyone for the many questions and for your participation, especially at such a late hour. Apparently, many of you missed us during the summer break, and even though it's already late, it's now 10:32 p.m., you're still here with us, sending in your questions. Thank you for that. If we don't get to one or another question, we will, of course, follow up by email or give you a call. Mr. Trinker will be working tomorrow as well, right, Mr. Trinker?
Of course.
And now let's move on to the last, I'd say, 5 or 6 questions. And yes, then that's it for today. But we're now back in our routine, in our cycle. So in 5 weeks, we'll continue again. More on that in just a moment. Next question. Why are central banks currently buying record amounts? Gold, while private individuals in Europe are still hesitating? Mr. Draguljevic?
Yes, well, I would say that this is all intentional in a way. So first, the big players are buying. Central banks is actually a nice word or a kind of rephrasing. I already touched on this somewhere in the presentation. They don't actually produce anything, the central banks, in terms of the economy, nothing. That means they simply take other people's money and secure it. So it's a very simple system. But this only works as long as not everyone else is buying. If everyone else were to buy now, there would quickly be nothing left on the market. Even we in the trade have had phases where things got tight, and such phases will come again. And then it's important to make provisions in good time. So you also know exactly how weak the current monetary system is. You see the rising debts, the problems with the dollar and the euro. And that's why they exchange their paper for gold, and on a gigantic scale. This, of course, drives the price up again, which means that private individuals act passively, I would say. So the big players are not price sensitive, but private individuals are. But in the long run, the price only knows one direction. That's why it's important not to be price sensitive and to take advantage of the current prices.
Absolutely. So that was central banks. Phew, there are so many questions about that. I just got a message whispered in my ear. I should tell Mr. Trinker that he has to work through today. That means he won't be drinking anything in his sleep tonight.
No problem.
All of that will have to be made up for later. The viewers are waiting for their answers, so let's continue right away. How can you protect yourself against malicious government intervention, like asset registers, AMLO asset registers, wealth taxes, and so on, Mr. Trinker?
Yes, dear sir or question writer, there is actually another law that hasn't even been mentioned yet. I'll add that now. I've already talked a lot about it. It's also a truly malicious law, at least by name, the so-called Law to Combat Asset Concealment, a significant piece of legislation. And we Austrians, we love Germany. So, dear Germans, don't get us wrong, but these are Germany's systems. You are very thorough, and that's just how you do things. But I have to say, things like this are a bit over the top. I'm sure Thomas would agree with me. There are many friendlier countries in this regard around the world with less strict laws. And that's why, as the only provider, we have a high security storage facility set up with Thomas in Brixland in Dubai. That's outside the EU, far away, far from those harsh words that criminalize everyone right away. because that's exactly what it is. If you have concerns about these matters, about these topics, please contact us right away. Singapore is also a good alternative for you, also outside the EU. And if these malicious systems come into play, then you just say goodbye and emigrate. Thanks again for the question.
Absolutely. What would happen if suddenly millions of people wanted to buy gold at the same time? That was Mr. Bachheimer. He's been waiting for a while. Go ahead, please.
Yes, in the short term, of course, we would see a spike in the price. First of all, millions won't be buying anymore because millions simply don't have the money anymore. Because unlike the central banks, who are crisis professionals since they actually cause the crises, the millions are the crisis victims and they don't buy gold, or if they do, it's too late. So if they all come too late, first the price goes up, but then they can only buy even less than they could before because of the price increase. That's obvious too. But because during this time, of course, when the rush begins, the state or supranational organizations are already intervening, you simply have less. But even millions would drive the price up, but only for a certain period, because then the so-called gold function would kick in. That is the gold producers who produce at 0.5 grams per ton. It would suddenly become worthwhile to extract 0.5 grams per ton like 40 years ago, whereas today it's common to have 2 grams, 3 grams per ton. 40 years ago with those prices, that wasn't possible. Now it is possible. And that's the so-called gold function. We would see a spike upwards because millions are buying, but then it would go back down again because the supply, of course, is delayed over time. It would be increased, and that's exactly it. That's what makes gold so wonderfully stable, because such shocks would certainly have an effect at first, but over time they would be absorbed again.
All right, thank you for the answer. So a viewer writes that he saw the advertising banner on our website. It says, "Why does life insurance guarantee poverty?" He has a life insurance policy and doesn't understand this. Perhaps Mr. Trinker.
Of course. Well, in fact, people imagine life insurance to be a nice product where you diligently pay in during your younger or middle-aged years so that when you retire, you are wonderfully provided for with a life insurance policy. It gets paid out and you have a nice return and everything and so on and so forth. In reality, it's exactly the opposite. In the end, you won't get what was promised to you, nor what you calculated for yourself if you get anything relevant at all. Inflation has already eaten away and eroded most of it. That means you've poured money into it your whole life, into something where in the end, you get nothing worthwhile out of it. You get nothing out of it. In fact, throughout the entire time you're paying in, all sorts of other people are making money off you as well. And there's even a court ruling in Hamburg where it was determined that you are allowed to call life insurance a legal fraud. That's guaranteed old age poverty if you invest in life insurance. So this isn't, I'm not saying this just because we want to offer you a solution, but that's how it is. However, we do have a solution for you. Contact us. We have a solution. It's lv2gold.com, or just contact us through our channels, which are also advertised here, email, phone numbers. We have the opportunity. We have the possibility to, so to speak, end your life insurance early. You can get the money that's in it out and invest it in gold. That's a completely different story. As we've heard today, since the introduction of the euro, so over the past 20 years, gold has increased tenfold. If you took out a life insurance policy 20 years ago and believe that now you will, if you think you can retire satisfied and happy, then in reality, old age poverty awaits you. So this is actually a very precarious situation, a very, very sad misuse really of a financial product that is essentially worthless. So get out of life insurance, seek advice one way or another. You'll always do best with gold, but life insurance? No, don't do that.
So get out of life insurance and into gold or silver or precious metals in total. Simply.
To freedom?
To freedom, exactly. And maybe LV to gold. We still have real estate for gold. It already existed, real estate and so on. Sell. Here too, we offer a super fast, efficient advisory solution. More on this from Mr. Trinker. We have 3 more questions. No, we have 2 questions for Mr. Draguljevich. How significant do you think BlackRock's influence on the gold price is? We've already covered that today.
Yes, so in principle, BlackRock's influence on the gold price is somewhat indirect, you have to say, but still noticeable in some ways. And that's on several levels. BlackRock is one of the largest asset managers in the world, as I already mentioned in the presentation. And of course, they're involved everywhere, holding shares in the largest US corporations. What's interesting is that BlackRock even has significant stakes in major gold mining companies. I also read recently that just in the spring of 2025, I'm not entirely sure, but I think it was over 40 million shares acquired from a Canadian company. They bought them from a Canadian mining corporation. And of course, that's a significant factor in the gold sector. On top of that, BlackRock also has a strong media presence and frequently publishes analyses and forecasts. This means that BlackRock, through its capital allocation, for example, in gold mining stocks, and its thought leadership within the investment community, where it is highly respected, can strongly influence the gold market, both directly and through knock-on effects. And of course, also through political influence.
All right, thank you for that. So I'm going to double check now. I think, yes, there are still some questions left, but yes, I'm being told in my ear right now. So today we've reached the end, dear viewers. Thank you to our experts, gentlemen. An incredible performance after the summer break. So much knowledge, so many insights. Thank you for that. Dear viewers, as you can see, yes, of course.
We had major disruptions here in Dubai because the underwater cable was damaged, and everyone in the Emirates was cursing over the internet in the last 3 days. It just came to mind now because I had some brief disruptions and it startled me 5 minutes ago, but everything went well. And I want to expressly thank the team here in Dubai, namely Damar and Ulrich, who worked with me on the technical side yesterday and today. Well, I just watched because when it comes to technology, I'm really clueless. I have no idea about it. And you can see what a 3-man team can accomplish. And hopefully we were able to pull this off without any disruptions. Once again, thanks to this team, they're doing a great job.
Thank you for the compliments. The colleagues will surely appreciate that. Speaking of colleagues, today again there were several people on site in the control room and in the room next to me who made all of this possible. Thank you for your work, even at this late hour, 10:45 p.m. An incredible achievement. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for that. Dear viewers, yes, as I already announced, in 5 weeks we'll be back again on the 22nd of October this time. You can find the topics again on the website, webinar Goldvorsorge. And yes, you can already register now for new viewers as well, even if you don't have time to attend the webinar. It's worth registering because you'll then get access to the other webinars, to the past ones, and also the recording of the new webinar. So it's definitely worth it. And that's why I will be here for you again in 5 weeks. Maybe one more thing about social media, which is a very important point. There you can follow Mr. Bachheimer, Mr. Trinker, and Mr. Draguljevich. Not just watch and listen at the live event. Also on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and all the other platforms out there. And yes, we've reached the end. I think I have nothing more to say. I wish you a restful and good night, and we'll see each other again in 5 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.